What would you do if a single act of kindness changed your entire life forever? When struggling, single father Ethan Walker brought a mysterious, rain-soaked stranger into his home. He never imagined she was the runaway daughter of one of America's wealthiest men. What started as one night of shelter became a collision between two worlds: poverty and privilege, desperation and hope. Stay with me until the very end of this story, and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale of unexpected love has traveled. The rain fell like cold needles against Ethan Walker's face as he trudged down Maple Street, his work boots splashing through puddles that reflected the dying glow of streetlights. It was nearly midnight, and Cedar Falls, a town small enough that everyone knew your business, but not small enough to actually care, had rolled up its sidewalks hours ago. The only sounds were the rhythmic patter of rain and the occasional hiss of tires on wet pavement from the highway a mile away. Ethan pulled his reflective safety jacket tighter, though it did little against the October chill that had settled over northern Minnesota. His bones ached with the particular exhaustion that comes from 12-hour shifts loading freight at the distribution center, the kind of tired that sleep never quite cured because you knew you'd be doing it all again in less than 10 hours. He was thinking about Lila, as he always did during these long walks home. His 7-year-old daughter would be asleep by now, curled up under the patchwork quilt his mother had made before she passed. Mrs. Chen from next door would be dozing in the armchair, the television's blue glow flickering across her kind, weathered face. He'd have to wake her gently, press $20 into her hand despite her protests, and thank her again for watching Lila while he worked nights. $20 he couldn't afford, but what choice did he have? Ethan was so lost in mental calculations, rent due in 5 days, electricity bill already 2 weeks late, Lila needing new shoes before winter really hit, that he almost missed her. Almost. But there's something about human suffering that catches the eye even when you're drowning in your own. Maybe it's instinct, or maybe it's just that people like Ethan, who knew what rock bottom felt like, developed a radar for others teetering on that same edge. She was huddled under the awning of Murphy's Hardware, which had been closed since 6. The streetlight above cast her in harsh shadows, but Ethan could see enough. A young woman, maybe early 20s, soaked to the bone despite the inadequate shelter. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face. She wore jeans and a thin jacket that might have been expensive once, but now just looked pathetic against the rain. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, and she was shaking. Whether from cold or something else, Ethan couldn't tell. Most people would have walked past. Cedar Falls wasn't big enough to have a serious homeless problem, but it wasn't small enough to be immune to human tragedy either. You learned to look away, to tell yourself it wasn't your problem, that you had enough troubles of your own. Ethan stopped walking. He stood there for a long moment, rain dripping from his jacket, exhaustion pulling at every muscle, while some internal debate played out. He thought of Lila, of the $20 in his wallet that was already spoken for. He thought of the last time he'd tried to help someone, his ex-wife's cousin, who'd stolen Lila's birthday money and disappeared. He thought of every responsible reason to keep walking. Then he thought of his mother, who used to say that kindness wasn't about having enough to share. It was about sharing even when you didn't. "Hey!" Ethan called out, his voice rough from disuse. He'd barely spoken all shift. "You okay?" The woman's head jerked up, and for a split second Ethan saw pure terror in her eyes, the look of a cornered animal. Then she seemed to force herself into stillness, her face going carefully blank. Even in the dim light, even with rain and exhaustion obscuring details, Ethan could see she was pretty. But it was the kind of pretty that had been beaten down by something, her features sharp with hunger or fear, or both. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Just waiting for someone." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Nobody waited for anyone at midnight under Murphy's awning. Not in Cedar Falls. Not in this weather. Ethan should have nodded and walked away. That would have been the smart thing, the safe thing. Instead, he heard himself say, "There's a diner about 2 miles that way. Stays open till 2. They've got coffee and—" "I said I'm fine." Her voice was sharper now, with an edge that suggested she'd had practice shutting people down. "I don't need anything." "Okay." Ethan shifted his weight, aware of how he must look. A tall, broad-shouldered man in work clothes, approaching a vulnerable woman alone at night. He took a step back, hands visible. I'm just heading home. Live about 3 blocks that way. He gestured vaguely east. If you change your mind about that diner, or if you need, I don't know, a phone to call someone, or just to get out of the rain for a minute. He trailed off, feeling foolish. What was he doing? He had nothing to offer. His house was barely more than a shack held together by determination and duct tape. He was nobody, just another tired man in a town full of them, trying to keep his head above water and failing more often than not. The woman stared at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She was looking at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle, to figure out what angle he was working, what he wanted from her. Why? She finally asked. Why what? Why would you help me? You don't know me. Ethan shrugged, suddenly aware of how bone-deep tired he was. Guess I know what it's like to be stuck in the rain with nowhere to go. Doesn't feel good. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. For a moment, her carefully constructed walls seemed to crack, and Ethan saw the scared girl underneath the defensive exterior. Then she looked away. You should go home. I'm sure someone's waiting for you. My daughter's asleep, and the neighbor who watches her is probably snoring in my armchair. Ethan surprised himself with the confession. He didn't usually talk about his life to strangers. Look, I'm not trying to be a hero or anything. I'm just saying, it's cold, you're wet, and I've got a couch and a roof that doesn't leak. Much. I don't need your pity. The words came out hard, but Ethan heard the waver underneath them, pride trying to hold against need. It's not pity, he said quietly. It's just being human. We're supposed to help each other, right? That's the deal. That's not how the world works. Maybe not, but it's how I work. They looked at each other through the rain. Ethan could see her wavering, could see the exhaustion and desperation she was trying so hard to hide. He also saw something else, a deep, bone-deep wariness, the kind that came from being hurt too many times. One night, he said, the couch, some dry clothes if you want them, and I'll mind my own business. In the morning, you can leave whenever you want. No questions, no judgment, no strings. Why would you trust me? I could rob you. I could be dangerous. Ethan almost laughed, but it would have sounded bitter. Lady, I've got nothing worth stealing. The TV's from 2010. There's maybe $40 in the whole house, and the most valuable thing I own is a used Honda that breaks down twice a month. You're welcome to any of it if it helps. It was the truth, delivered without self-pity or anger, just fact. And maybe that's what got through to her, because after another long moment of silence, she slowly unfolded herself from under the awning. She was taller than he'd expected, but so thin that her clothes hung on her frame. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled. One night, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. And I leave in the morning. Deal. They walked through the rain in silence, Ethan keeping a respectful distance. He caught her glancing at him sideways, still wary, still ready to run. He didn't blame her. The world taught women to be afraid of men, especially men offering help. The fact that she was willing to take the risk told him just how desperate she must be. Cedar Falls at midnight was a ghost town. They passed the closed pharmacy, the dark windows of the dollar store, the shuttered cafe where Ethan sometimes splurged on coffee when payday landed just right. Their footsteps echoed off the empty buildings, and the rain had settled into a steady drumbeat that seemed like it might never stop. What's your name? The woman asked suddenly. Ethan. Ethan Walker. She nodded but didn't offer her own name in return. Ethan didn't push. His house appeared after 3 blocks, a small, weathered structure that had seen better days sometime around 1975. The porch sagged on one side, the paint was peeling, and one of the shutters hung at an angle, but the lights were on inside, warm and yellow against the darkness. It's not much, Ethan said, suddenly embarrassed. He was about to bring this stranger, this girl who, despite her circumstances, had an air of refinement he couldn't quite place, into his shabby little house with its thrift store furniture and patched walls. It's perfect, she said, and there was something in her voice that made him look at her sharply. But her face was turned away, hidden in shadow. The door wasn't locked. Ethan had stopped locking it years ago, partly because there was nothing to steal, and partly because the lock was broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. They stepped into the small living room, and sure enough, Mrs. Chen was asleep in the armchair, her reading glasses slipping down her nose, a Korean drama playing quietly on the TV. Ethan touched her shoulder gently. "Mrs. Chen?" The old woman startled awake, then smiled when she saw him. Her smile faltered slightly when she noticed the soaked stranger standing in the doorway, but her manners were too good to show disapproval. "Ethan, dear, Lila was an angel, as always, asleep since 8:30. Mrs. Chen gathered her purse, eyeing the young woman with poorly concealed curiosity. "I made some stew. It's on the stove if you're hungry." "You're a lifesaver, Mrs. Chen." Ethan pressed a 20 into her hand, waving away her protests. "Please, I insist." After Mrs. Chen left with a final curious glance at their guest, Ethan closed the door and turned to find the woman standing frozen in the middle of his living room, dripping water onto the worn carpet. She was looking around with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not disgust, not pity, but something more complex. "Bathroom's down the hall," Ethan said, trying to see his home through her eyes and feeling inadequate. "There's towels in the closet. They're clean, just old. I can find some dry clothes if you want. They'll be too big, but—" "Why are you doing this?" she interrupted, turning to face him. Her eyes were searching his face again, like she was looking for the catch, the hidden agenda. "Really? Why?" Ethan was too tired for anything but honesty. "Because a long time ago, my wife left me with a baby and about $300 to my name. I was sleeping in my car, trying to figure out how to keep my daughter fed, when a stranger, a guy who worked at the gas station, offered to let me crash on his couch for a week. No questions asked." He paused, remembering. "That week gave me enough breathing room to find this place, to get the job at the distribution center. I never got to pay him back. He moved away before I could. So I guess I figure, maybe this is how you pay it forward. Maybe that's all any of us can do." The woman's eyes were bright, and Ethan realized with alarm that she was fighting tears. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Sophie," she said after a moment. "My name is Sophie." "Okay, Sophie, let's get you dry." 20 minutes later, Sophie emerged from the bathroom wearing a pair of Ethan's old sweatpants and a University of Minnesota t-shirt that hung to her knees. Her hair was still damp but no longer dripping, and some color had returned to her face. Ethan had set out blankets on the sagging couch, along with a pillow that had seen better days. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry," he said, keeping his distance, aware of how small the house was and how that might make her uncomfortable. "Help yourself to anything in the kitchen. It's not much, but—" "Thank you," Sophie said, and this time her voice cracked slightly on the words. "Thank you, Ethan." He nodded, suddenly awkward. "My daughter's room is right there," he said, pointing to the first door down the hall. "So if you need anything, just knock on my door. Second one. I'm a light sleeper." "Okay." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Ethan wanted to ask the questions crowding his mind: where she'd come from, what she was running from, whether she had family who was worried, but he'd promised no questions, and he meant it. "Good night, Sophie." "Good night." Ethan retreated to his room, closing the door quietly. Through the thin walls, he could hear the soft sounds of Sophie moving around the living room, then nothing. He lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, wondering what he'd just done, wondering if Lila would be safe with a stranger in the house, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life, or done the only decent thing he could. He must have dozed off eventually, because the next thing he knew, early morning light was filtering through the threadbare curtains, and someone was screaming. Ethan bolted out of bed, his heart hammering, and threw open his door. Lila stood in the hallway in her rainbow pajamas, her eyes wide with shock. And Sophie was sitting up on the couch, looking equally startled, the blankets tangled around her legs. "Daddy!" Lila shrieked, pointing dramatically at Sophie. "There's a princess on our couch!" The absurdity of it, the pure innocent wonder in his daughter's voice, broke through Ethan's panic. He found himself laughing, the tension draining from his shoulders as he scooped Lila into his arms. "That's not a princess, sweetheart. That's Sophie. She's a friend who needed a place to stay last night." "She looks like a princess," Lila insisted, studying Sophie with the serious intensity only a 7-year-old could muster. "She's got long hair and everything. Sophie, who had looked terrified a moment ago, was staring at Lila with an expression of pure wonder. Then slowly she smiled. A real smile, not the careful, guarded expression she'd worn the night before. It transformed her face, made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I'm not a princess," Sophie said softly, "but thank you. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever called me." Lila wiggled out of Ethan's arms and approached the couch with the fearlessness of a child who'd never learned to mistrust strangers. "Are you staying for breakfast? Daddy makes pancakes on Sunday mornings. They're kind of burnt, but they're good if you put enough syrup on them." "Lila," Ethan warned, embarrassed. "Sophie was just leaving." "Actually," Sophie interrupted, her eyes still on Lila, "burnt pancakes sound perfect. If that's okay." Ethan looked between his daughter, bouncing with excitement, and this mysterious woman who'd materialized out of the rain. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was a bad idea, that he should let her leave, should go back to his simple, struggling life without complications. But there was something in Sophie's eyes, a desperate hunger that had nothing to do with food. It was the look of someone who'd been alone for so long that even burnt pancakes with a stranger felt like salvation. "Okay," Ethan heard himself say. "Pancakes it is." The kitchen was tiny, barely big enough for two people to move around comfortably, but somehow the three of them made it work. Lila chattered nonstop, asking Sophie a million questions with the boundless curiosity of childhood. Where did she come from? Did she have any pets? What was her favorite color? Did she like unicorns? Sophie answered patiently, carefully, revealing almost nothing of substance but engaging with Lila's enthusiasm in a way that made Ethan's chest ache. He watched them while he mixed batter, store-brand pancake mix because that's what he could afford, and tried to figure out who this woman really was. She had an accent he couldn't quite place, not Southern or Midwestern, but something more refined? Educated? The way she held herself, even in borrowed sweatpants, suggested someone used to better circumstances. But then there were the bruises he'd noticed on her wrists when she pushed up the sleeves to help Lila set the table, fading but visible in the shape of fingerprints. Someone had grabbed her, hard. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. No questions. That was the deal. "Daddy, the pancakes are smoking," Lila announced helpfully. "Right. Sorry." Ethan flipped them quickly, revealing their characteristic burnt edges. "See? Perfectly imperfect." Sophie laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that both Ethan and Lila stopped to stare at her. She clapped a hand over her mouth, looking embarrassed. "Sorry, I can't remember the last time I had burnt pancakes. Or any pancakes, really." "Where do you live that they don't have pancakes?" Lila asked, scandalized. "Lila, honey, maybe we should—" Ethan started. "It's okay," Sophie said quietly. She knelt down so she was at Lila's eye level. "I've been living in a place where everything was perfect all the time. Perfect food, perfect clothes, perfect everything. And you know what? Perfect is really, really boring. It makes you forget what real things taste like." Lila considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "That sounds sad." "It was," Sophie agreed, "but I think I'm done with perfect now." They ate breakfast at the rickety kitchen table, Ethan, Lila, and Sophie, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The pancakes were indeed burnt on the edges and gummy in the middle. The syrup was the cheap kind from the dollar store, and they drank water because Ethan had forgotten to buy milk. It should have been a disaster. Instead, it was perfect. Sophie ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the finest meal she'd ever had. She listened to Lila's rambling stories about school and her best friend Maya and the stray cat that lived behind the convenience store. She laughed at Lila's jokes and asked follow-up questions and seemed genuinely interested in the life of a 7-year-old in Cedar Falls, Minnesota. And Ethan found himself relaxing, letting down the guard he usually kept up around strangers. There was something about Sophie, beneath the obvious fear and exhaustion, that felt trustworthy, genuine. Like maybe, despite all evidence to the contrary, she was exactly who she appeared to be. Just someone who needed help. After breakfast, Lila insisted on showing Sophie her room. "It's small, but I have a good view of the tree," while Ethan cleaned up the kitchen. Through the wall, he could hear his daughter's excited voice and Sophie's softer responses, punctuated by occasional laughter. He was drying the last plate when Sophie appeared in the doorway. She'd changed back into her own clothes, still damp but wearable, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. The borrowed clothes were folded neatly over her arm. "I should go," she said, and Ethan heard the regret in her voice. "I've imposed enough. Thank you for everything." "Where will you go?" The question was out before Ethan could stop himself. Sophie's face shuddered. "I'll figure something out. I always do." "Sophie." Ethan set down the dish towel, choosing his words carefully. "Look, I know I said no questions, and I meant it. But if you need... Cedar Falls isn't big, but there are resources. The church runs a shelter, and there's... I can't go to a shelter." Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "I can't. There are people looking for me. If I use my name anywhere, if I show up on any official registry..." She stopped, seeming to realize she'd said too much. Ethan's mind was racing. People looking for her, running from something official, those bruises on her wrists. "Are you in trouble?" he asked quietly. "Like legal trouble?" "No, nothing like that. I didn't do anything wrong. I just..." Sophie's hands twisted together. "I just need to disappear for a while, to figure things out." This was the moment where Ethan should have shown her the door, should have protected his daughter from whatever mess this woman had brought to his doorstep. It was the responsible thing to do, the smart thing. Instead, he said, "The laundromat down on 3rd Street is hiring. My buddy Carl runs it. He pays cash, doesn't ask too many questions. If you need a few days to get on your feet..." Sophie stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "Why would you... You don't even know me. I know you made my daughter laugh at breakfast. I know you washed your dishes without being asked. I know you're scared and running from something, and..." Ethan paused, surprised by his own conviction. "And I know what it's like to need a second chance. So if you want it, the offer's there." For a long moment, Sophie just looked at him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Ethan could see her fighting some internal battle. Pride against need, fear against hope. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she finally whispered. "I've been sleeping in bus stations and under bridges for 2 weeks. I have $43 and a credit card I can't use because they'll trace it. I'm so tired and I'm so scared and I don't know what to do." The confession seemed to break something in her. Her shoulders slumped, the last of her defenses crumbling, and suddenly she wasn't a mysterious stranger anymore. She was just a frightened girl who needed help. "Okay," Ethan said gently. "Then here's what we're going to do. You're going to stay on the couch for a few more nights, a week maybe, until you get a couple paychecks from Carl. No arguments," he added, when Sophie opened her mouth to protest. "Lila already loves you, and honestly, it'll be nice to have another adult around. The house gets lonely." "I can't ask you to..." "You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference." Sophie looked down at the folded clothes in her arms, and Ethan saw a tear splash onto the worn fabric of his old t-shirt. When she looked back up, her eyes were swimming. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Wait till you see how bad the couch really is for sleeping. Your back's going to hate me by day 3. It was a weak joke, but it worked. Sophie laughed through her tears, and some of the tension in the room broke. "Can Sophie stay, Daddy?" Lila appeared from her room, having clearly been eavesdropping. "Please? She said she'd teach me how to braid hair." Ethan raised an eyebrow at Sophie, who had the grace to look embarrassed. "I may have promised some hair tutorials." "Then I guess she's staying," Ethan said, ruffling Lila's hair. "At least until you learn all her secrets." The next few days fell into an unexpected rhythm. Ethan worked his night shifts, came home exhausted, and found Sophie and Lila laughing over breakfast. Sophie started work at Carl's laundromat, coming home with red, chapped hands and stories about the regulars. She insisted on contributing to groceries, pooling her cash wages with Ethan's paycheck, and suddenly they could afford things like fresh vegetables and real coffee instead of the instant kind. "This is too much," Ethan protested when Sophie came home with a bag full of actual groceries: chicken breast, fresh broccoli, a gallon of milk, a box of real butter. "It's not too much. It's fair." Sophie was unloading the bags, organizing the fridge with an efficiency that suggested she'd never done it before but was determined to get it right. "You gave me a place to stay. The least I can do is help feed us." "Sophie, Ethan, She turned to face him, and in the afternoon light streaming through the kitchen window, he was struck again by how pretty she was. The exhaustion was fading from her face, replaced by something like peace. Please, let me do this. Let me feel like I'm contributing something. So he did. Lila thrived with Sophie around. The little girl had been starved for female attention. Ethan did his best, but he was just one person, working impossible hours, trying to be both mother and father. Sophie filled a gap he hadn't even realized was there. She braided Lila's hair before school, helped with homework at the kitchen table, listened to endless stories about playground politics and the mysterious ways of second-grade boys. And Ethan found himself looking forward to coming home. It had been just him and Lila for so long, ever since Melissa left when Lila was 6 months old, chasing some dream of a bigger life that apparently didn't include a husband and baby. He'd built walls around his heart, focused entirely on keeping his daughter safe and fed and happy. He didn't have time for friends, for relationships, for anything that wasn't work and Lila. But Sophie was different. She wasn't asking for anything, wasn't expecting anything. She was just there. Making coffee in the morning, leaving little notes stuck to the fridge. Took Lila to the park, back by 5S. Humming while she folded laundry. The house felt warmer with her in it, more like a home and less like a survival bunker. "Daddy's happy now," Lila announced one evening at dinner. Spaghetti with actual meat sauce, another Sophie contribution. "He smiles more." Ethan felt his face heat. "I smile plenty." "Not like this." Lila gestured vaguely at his face. "This is different. This is like inside happy, not just outside happy." Sophie was studying her plate intently, but Ethan could see the hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. "Well," he said, "I guess having another person to talk to helps. Gets lonely, just the two of us sometimes." "I'm not boring," Lila protested. "Never said you were, kiddo. You're the least boring person I know." But that night, after Lila was in bed, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch, a luxury he usually couldn't afford in October. But the rain had stopped and the night was unusually warm. Sophie joined him without asking, 2 cups of tea in her hands. "Where'd the tea come from?" Ethan asked, accepting his cup. "I bought it. Hope that's okay. I don't know, it seemed like something we could use. Something nice." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea that was probably fancier than anything Ethan had ever tasted. The neighborhood was quiet, just the distant sound of traffic from the highway and Mrs. Chen's TV through her window. "Can I ask you something?" Sophie said finally. "Sure. Why did your wife leave?" Ethan had been expecting the question eventually. "She was young, we both were. Got married too fast, had Lila too soon. When reality hit, the bills, the diapers, the crying at 3 a.m., she realized it wasn't what she wanted." He paused. "Or I wasn't what she wanted. Hard to say." "That must have been hard." "It was. Still is sometimes. But I've got Lila, and that's everything." He glanced at Sophie. "What about you? What are you running from?" He hadn't meant to ask, but sitting there in the dark with tea warming his hands and Sophie beside him, it felt natural, safe. Sophie was quiet for so long that Ethan thought she wouldn't answer. Then, expectations, control, a life that looked perfect, but felt like a prison. Her voice was soft, almost dreamy. "I had everything, Ethan. Everything anyone could want, and I was so miserable I couldn't breathe." "Family?" "My father. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just him and me. And his empire, his legacy, his plans for my future." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to have your entire life mapped out before you're old enough to understand what you're losing?" Ethan thought about his own life. The constant struggle, the uncertainty, never knowing if he'd make rent. "Can't say I do. Sounds suffocating, though." "It is. I don't know." Sophie set down her tea, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's probably looking for me, probably hired people. I shouldn't stay here much longer. I'm putting you and Lila at risk." "What would happen if he found you?" "He'd take me back. Make me go back to being the perfect daughter, the perfect heiress, the perfect puppet, and I'd rather live under a bridge for the rest of my life than go back to that." The vehemence in her voice startled Ethan. He'd seen people desperate before. He'd been desperate himself. But this was something different. This was someone who'd tasted freedom and would do anything not to lose it again. "Then don't," he said simply. "Don't go back. It's not that easy." "Why not?" Sophie laughed, the sound hollow. "Because he's Richard Blake. Because he owns half the companies in this state. Because when Richard Blake wants something, he gets it, always." The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the fear in Sophie's voice told him everything he needed to know. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "As safe as anywhere, anyway. Cedar Falls is small enough that strangers stand out, but too boring for anyone to really pay attention. If you need more time, I can't keep taking advantage of your kindness. It's not advantage if I'm offering." Ethan finished his tea, the cup empty but still warm in his hands. "Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand your world. I don't. But I understand running, and I understand fear, and I understand what it means to need a safe place to catch your breath. So stay. Stay as long as you need to." Sophie turned to look at him, and in the dim porch light her eyes were luminous. "Why are you so kind?" "I'm not. I'm just doing what someone once did for me. That's all." But even as he said it, Ethan knew it wasn't quite true. Because somewhere in the past few days, Sophie had stopped being just a stranger. He was helping. She'd become part of their little household, part of their family. And the thought of her leaving, of the house going back to being just him and Lila, made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt in years. He was falling for her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He was falling for this mysterious, broken, beautiful woman who'd stumbled into his life out of the rain, and he had no idea what to do about it. "Ethan?" Sophie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Thank you for everything, for not asking questions, for just letting me be nobody for a while." "You're not nobody," he said, and meant it. "You're Sophie, and you're welcome here." They sat together in the darkness, two people from completely different worlds, connected by circumstances and kindness and something else, something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. Inside, through the window, they could see Lila's nightlight glowing softly in her room. A child sleeping safely, unaware of the complicated adult world swirling around her. And for that moment, at least, everything was perfect, even if they both knew it couldn't last. The following Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made Cedar Falls almost beautiful. Sophie stood outside Carl's wash and fold, the laundromat's faded sign creaking gently in the breeze, and took a deep breath before pushing through the door. The smell hit her first, detergent and fabric softener and steam, undercut by something vaguely metallic from the old machines. It was nothing like the climate-controlled luxury of Blake Holdings' corporate headquarters, nothing like the pristine penthouse she'd grown up in. It was real and honest and completely overwhelming. "You must be Sophie." A man in his 50s emerged from the back, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. His face was weathered but kind, with laugh lines around his eyes. "Ethan called me, said you needed work." "Yes, sir. I'm a hard worker, I promise. I can learn quickly, and I don't mind long hours." Carl held up a hand, cutting off her nervous rambling. "Ethan vouched for you. That's good enough for me. His word means something around here." He tossed her an apron, blue and worn, but clean. "Pays $9 an hour, cash every Friday. Hours are 7 to 3, Monday through Saturday. You start now." Sophie caught the apron, her hands trembling slightly. $9 an hour. She'd spent more than that on a single coffee in her old life, had worn dresses that cost more than Carl probably made in a month. Now those $9 felt like a fortune. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. You haven't seen the backed-up dryers in the corner." The work was brutal. Sophie had never done manual labor in her life. The closest she'd come was arranging flowers for a charity event, supervised by a professional florist who'd done all the actual work. Now her hands were plunged into hot water, scrubbing stains from other people's clothes. She loaded industrial washers that required her full body weight to close, hauled wet laundry in canvas bins that left her shoulders screaming, folded endless stacks of towels and sheets until her fingers cramped. By noon, her back ached. By 2, blisters had formed on her palms. By 3, when Carl told her she could clock out, Sophie was fairly certain she'd never been so exhausted in her entire life, and she'd never felt better. "You did good today," Carl said, pressing $45 into her blistered hands. "Real good. See you tomorrow?" "Yes. Absolutely yes." Sophie walked home. Home. What a strange word for Ethan's little house, with her first day's wages clutched in her hand. $45. In her old life, she wouldn't have bent down to pick up a $50 bill if she'd dropped it. Now these wrinkled bills felt like victory. She stopped at the corner store and bought ground beef, pasta, a jar of sauce, and a box of brownie mix. The cashier, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled at her. "Making dinner for someone special?" "Just friends," Sophie said, the word feeling strange and wonderful in her mouth. "Just people who've been kind to me." When she let herself into the house, Ethan had given her a key which felt like a gift beyond measure. She found Lila at the kitchen table, tongue sticking out in concentration as she worked on her homework. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Sophie. "You're home! How was work? Did you wash a million clothes? Did your hands get all wrinkly?" Sophie laughed, setting down her bags. "I washed at least a million clothes. And yes, my hands are very wrinkly. How was school?" "Boring. Mrs. Peterson made us do multiplication tables forever. But guess what? Maya said I could come to her birthday party. It's at the skating rink, and Daddy said I could go if I finish all my homework this week." "That's wonderful. I've never been ice skating." Lila's eyes widened in horror. "Never? Not even once?" "Not even once. That's so sad. Maybe Daddy can take us sometime. He's not very good. He falls a lot. But it's really fun." Sophie felt warmth spread through her chest. The casual inclusion in Lila's plans, the assumption that Sophie would still be here for future adventures, it was intoxicating. "I'd like that." She started dinner while Lila finished her homework, the domestic ritual feeling surreal. 6 weeks ago, she'd been attending a gala in a $10,000 gown, making small talk with senators and CEOs while servers offered champagne and tiny, artful appetizers. Now she was browning ground beef in a dented pan, and somehow this felt more real, more meaningful than any of those polished evenings ever had. Ethan came home at 6:30, his face drawn with exhaustion, his work clothes dusty and stained. But when he walked into the kitchen and saw the table set, dinner cooking, Lila doing homework with Sophie's help, his whole face transformed. "You cooked," he said, and there was something in his voice that made Sophie's heart skip. "It's just spaghetti, nothing fancy." "It smells amazing." He set down his lunchbox, running a hand through his hair. "How was your first day?" "Hard. Wonderful. Strange." Sophie stirred the sauce, avoiding his eyes. "Carl's nice. The work is different than anything I've ever done." "Your hands." Ethan had crossed the kitchen before she could react, catching her wrist gently. Her palms were red and raw, 2 blisters already forming at the base of her fingers where she'd gripped the laundry bins. "Sophie, you should have worn gloves." "I didn't know. I'll remember tomorrow." But Ethan was already moving, pulling open the cabinet under the sink. He returned with a first aid kit, ancient and half empty but functional, and guided her to sit at the table. Lila watched with interest as her father carefully cleaned and bandaged Sophie's hands, his touch gentle despite his own work-roughened fingers. "You don't have to do this work," he said quietly, not looking at her face. "If it's too hard, I want to do it." Sophie's voice was firm. "I need to do it. For the first time in my life, I'm earning something, really earning it, not just existing because of who my father is." Ethan's hand stilled on hers. "Your father must be someone important." It wasn't quite a question, but Sophie heard the curiosity underneath. She'd been so careful not to reveal too much, to keep her past safely locked away. But sitting here in this warm kitchen, with Lila humming over her math problems and Ethan tending to her wounds like they mattered, the walls she'd built felt less necessary. "He's very important," she said carefully, "in his world. But that world, it's not mine anymore. I don't want it to be. What if he finds you? Then I run again." She said it with more confidence than she felt. "But maybe Maybe I'll have earned enough money by then to get farther this time. To disappear somewhere he'll never think to look. The thought of leaving made her chest ache. In just over a week, this little house with its peeling paint and secondhand furniture had become more of a home than her father's penthouse ever was. Lila had become the little sister she'd never had. And Ethan, she couldn't let herself think about Ethan. Couldn't let herself imagine what might happen if she stayed long enough to really know him, to explore the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, to understand the way her heart stuttered when he smiled. "Well," Ethan said, finishing the last bandage, "until then, you're going to wear gloves. I'll pick some up tomorrow." "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." Their eyes met, and Sophie felt something shift in the air between them, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge but both could feel building, inevitable as a storm. "Dinner's ready," Lila announced, breaking the moment. "And I finished my homework, so I get extra dessert, right?" They ate together, the three of them crowded around the small table, and Sophie listened to Lila recount her entire day in exhaustive detail. The little girl had a gift for storytelling, turning the mundane drama of second-grade lunch politics into an epic saga. Ethan interjected occasionally with questions or gentle corrections when Lila's enthusiasm stretched the truth, and Sophie found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in months. After dinner, while Ethan helped Lila with her bath, Sophie did the dishes. Her bandaged hands made the task awkward, but she managed. She was drying the last plate when she noticed something on the counter, a stack of bills half hidden under a newspaper. The top one was stamped in red. "Final notice," says she shouldn't have looked. It was none of her business, but her eyes caught the amount, $847.23, and the words, "Electric service will be discontinued if payment is not received by..." The date was 3 days away. Sophie's stomach twisted. She thought of the groceries she'd bought, the small luxuries she'd been adding to their meals. She'd been so focused on contributing her fair share that she hadn't realized how precarious Ethan's situation really was. The man had taken her in, a stranger, when he was barely keeping his own head above water. The next morning, Sophie left for work earlier than usual. Instead of going straight to the laundromat, she walked 6 blocks to the Cedar Falls Public Library, a small brick building that smelled like old books and possibility. The librarian, a woman in her 30s with purple-framed glasses, looked up with a smile. "Can I help you?" "I need to use a computer for job searching." "Sure thing. Sign in here and you can use any of the terminals by the window." Sophie's fingers trembled as she opened the browser. She couldn't use her real name, couldn't access her accounts, couldn't leave any digital trail that her father's investigators might follow. But she could look at the balance of her trust fund, the one her mother had left her, the one that would activate when she turned 25. 18 months. She had 18 months until she could access money that was truly hers, not controlled by her father. Until then, she was exactly what she appeared to be, a runaway with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever she could earn. Unless she went back. Unless she gave in, let her father win, returned to the gilded cage she'd escaped. The thought made her physically ill. Sophie logged off and walked to work, her mind churning. The laundromat was already busy when she arrived, Carl wrestling with a jammed dryer while a line of customers waited impatiently. She threw herself into work, grateful for the physical exhaustion that kept her from thinking too much. At lunch, she sat on the back step with her brown bag, sandwich and apple, packed by Ethan that morning, and stared at her bandaged hands. In her old life, she'd had weekly manicures, hands that had never seen real work. Now they were blistered and raw, and she'd never been more proud of anything in her life. "You settling in okay?" Carl appeared beside her, his own lunch in hand. "I know it's not glamorous work." "It's honest work," Sophie said. "That means more than you know." Carl studied her with shrewd eyes. "Ethan's a good man, one of the best I know. Been through hell and came out the other side still decent, still kind. That's rare." "I know. Just be careful with him. And with Lila. They've been hurt before. They don't need more of it." Sophie looked at the older man, saw the protective concern in his face. "I would never hurt them. They've given me more in 2 weeks than most people give in a lifetime." "Didn't say you would, just said be careful. The road to hell and all that." He stood, brushing crumbs from his pants. "You're doing good work here, Sophie." Whatever you're running from, I hope you find what you're running to. The days blurred together. Sophie fell into a rhythm. Work, home, dinner with Ethan and Lila, evenings on the porch after Lila was asleep. She and Ethan talked about everything and nothing. His childhood in rural Wisconsin, her love of old movies, his dreams of one day owning his own business, her memories of her mother before the cancer took her. They didn't talk about the growing tension between them, the way their hands would brush accidentally and linger a moment too long, the way they'd catch each other staring and quickly look away. They didn't talk about the impossible situation they were in, him barely surviving financially, her hiding from a powerful father who would eventually find her. They didn't talk about what would happen when Sophie's temporary situation became untenable. 2 weeks after Sophie started work, she came home to find something on the porch, a shoebox wrapped in brown paper with a note taped to the top. The handwriting was Ethan's, messy but legible. If you must walk, walk without pain. Inside were new work shoes, nothing fancy, just sturdy sneakers with good support. But they were exactly her size, and when Sophie calculated the cost, she realized Ethan had probably spent a significant portion of his paycheck on them. She found him in the kitchen, trying to pretend he was absorbed in helping Lila with a science project about plants. Her hands were shaking as she held the box. "Ethan, they're practical," he said quickly, not looking at her. "Your old shoes were falling apart, and you're on your feet all day. It's just practical. You can't afford this." "Sure I can. It's fine." "Ethan, I saw the electric bill. I know things are tight. You can't spend money on me when..." "When what? When you work your hands raw trying to help out? When you make dinner every night and help my daughter with her homework and make this house feel like an actual home for the first time in years?" His voice was rough with emotion. "You don't think that's worth a pair of decent shoes?" Sophie felt tears burn her eyes. "I'm supposed to be the one helping you. You gave me a place to stay, a chance to..." "You're helping, more than you know." Ethan finally looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Sophie, before you got here, I was drowning. Working myself to death, barely keeping my head above water, watching my daughter grow up in the gaps between my shifts. Now there's someone here when I get home. Someone who cares about Lila, who makes her laugh, who braids her hair and listens to her stories. Someone who..." He trailed off, seeming to realize he was saying too much. "Someone who what?" Sophie whispered. "Someone who makes me remember there's more to life than just surviving." The air between them was electric. Lila was in the other room, humming to herself, oblivious to the moment unfolding in the kitchen. Sophie took a step closer to Ethan, then another, until she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could smell the faint scent of laundry detergent that always clung to him. "I should go," she said, but she didn't move. "I should take my things and go before I make everything more complicated than it already is. Please don't." 2 words. That's all it took to shatter whatever resolve she'd been clinging to. "I'm going to break your heart," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "When my father finds me, or when I have to run again, I'm going to break your heart and Lila's heart and mine, and I don't know how to stop it." "Then don't think about it. Don't think about tomorrow or next week or what happens when... Just be here now. Be here with us." It was the worst advice anyone could have given, the most irresponsible, illogical, dangerous thing either of them could do. They both knew it. Sophie kissed him anyway. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them testing the waters of something they'd been pretending didn't exist. Then Ethan's hand came up to cup her face, and Sophie's fingers twisted in his shirt, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and desperate and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophie rested her forehead against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "The worst," he agreed. "I don't care." "Me neither." From the other room, Lila called out, "Daddy! Sophie! Come see what I made!" They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, and despite everything, the impossibility of their situation, the heartbreak looming in their future, Sophie found herself laughing. Ethan was grinning too, his eyes bright, looking younger than she'd ever seen him. "We're coming, sweetheart," he called back, then quieter to Sophie. "We should probably talk about this." "Probably." "Later?" "Later." But later came sooner than either of them expected. That night, after Lila was asleep, they sat on the porch in their usual spots, the October air finally carrying a real chill. Sophie had wrapped herself in one of Ethan's old sweatshirts, and she caught him staring at her with an expression that made her heart ache. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, "about who I am, about who my father is. You don't have to—" "I do. If this is—" She gestured helplessly between them. "You deserve to know what you're getting into." So she told him about Richard Blake, CEO of Blake Holdings, a corporate empire worth billions, about growing up in a penthouse with more rooms than people, with staff who knew her schedule better than she did, with a father who loved her in theory but treated her like a business asset in practice, about the arranged marriage her father had planned to the son of a business partner, a merger disguised as a wedding, about the night she'd finally snapped, stolen cash from her father's safe, and run. "I left everything," she finished. "My phone, my cards, my entire life. The only thing I took was my mother's necklace, the sapphire one she wore every day before she died. I sold it to a pawn shop in Chicago for $800. That's what I've been living on. That and what I make at Carl's." Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing. Sophie waited, heart in her throat, for him to tell her to leave, to say he couldn't risk getting involved with someone like her, someone whose father had the resources to destroy anyone who got in his way. Instead, he said, "Your mother's necklace. Did it hurt? To sell it?" Of all the questions she'd expected, that wasn't one of them. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, it was the last piece of her I had. But I told myself she'd understand, that she'd want me to be free more than she'd want me to keep a necklace. She sounds like she was a good mom. She was. She was everything my father isn't, warm and kind and present. When she died, it was like all the color drained out of my life. My father threw himself into work, and I just existed. A pretty doll in a pretty cage." "You're not a doll." Ethan's voice was fierce. "You're strong and brave and so damn stubborn. You work harder than anyone I know, even when your hands are bleeding. You make my daughter laugh. You make me—" He stopped, shook his head. "Sophie, I don't care who your father is or how much money he has. I care about you, the real you. The woman who burns pancakes and falls asleep on the couch with Lila watching Disney movies. That's who I see." Sophie launched herself at him, kissing him hard, tasting salt from her own tears. His arms came around her, solid and real, and for the first time since she'd run, Sophie let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. Could have him. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, wrapped around each other, stealing kisses between whispered conversations. They talked about everything, fears and hopes and all the impossible dreams that seemed slightly less impossible when spoken aloud in the darkness. "What would you do?" Sophie asked. "If you could do anything, if money wasn't an issue." Ethan was quiet, his hand absently playing with her hair. "I'd open a restaurant, nothing fancy, just a place where people could get good, honest food, comfort food, the kind of stuff my mom used to make." He laughed softly. "I know it's stupid. I can barely keep my own kitchen running, and I'm dreaming about feeding other people." "It's not stupid. It's beautiful. What about you? If you weren't running, what would you want?" Sophie considered. In her old life, she'd never been asked what she wanted. Her future had been predetermined, every step planned by her father and his advisors. I think I'd want exactly this. A small house, a normal job, people who care about me for who I am and not what I can do for them." She paused. "Maybe I'd go back to school. I had 2 years of college before my father pulled me out to work for the company. I was studying art history. I loved it." "You should do it. When things settle down, when you're safe, you should finish your degree." "Maybe, if I ever get the chance." The unspoken threat hung between them. Sophie's father, his resources, the inevitable moment when her hiding place would be discovered. But they pushed it aside, clinging to the fragile present, to these stolen moments of happiness that felt all the more precious for their fragility. The next few weeks were the happiest of Sophie's life. She worked at the laundromat, her hands growing calloused but capable. She came home to Lila's excited chatter and Ethan's tired smiles. She cooked dinner and helped with homework and fell asleep on the couch more often than not, exhausted but content. And late at night, after Lila was asleep, she and Ethan would steal time together, on the porch, in the kitchen, anywhere they could talk and touch, and pretend that the outside world didn't exist. They were careful around Lila, not wanting to confuse her or make promises they might not be able to keep. But the little girl was perceptive, and Sophie caught her watching them with knowing eyes, a small smile playing at her lips. "Are you and Daddy boyfriend-girlfriend?" Lila asked one Saturday morning while they were making pancakes. Less burnt now, Sophie had been practicing. Sophie nearly dropped the spatula. "What makes you ask that?" "You smile at each other all the time. And Daddy's happy now. Really happy. Not just pretend happy." Lila tilted her head, considering. "I think it would be okay if you were boyfriend-girlfriend. I like you." "I like you too, sweetheart." "So are you? Boyfriend-girlfriend?" Sophie looked at this remarkable little girl, so wise beyond her years, so open-hearted despite everything she'd been through. "Yes," she said quietly. "I think we are. Is that really okay with you?" Lila's face split into a grin. "It's super okay. Does this mean you'll stay forever?" And there it was. The question Sophie had been dreading. The one she didn't have an answer to. "I'll stay as long as I can," she said, which was both the truth and not enough. "Good, because you're like a mom, kind of. Not exactly, because I had a mom and she left, but you're like what I think a mom should be. You don't leave, even when things are hard." Sophie pulled Lila into a fierce hug, her eyes burning with tears. Over the little girl's shoulder, she saw Ethan standing in the doorway, and the look on his face, love and hope and fear all mixed together, nearly broke her heart. That afternoon, while Lila was at Maya's birthday party, Ethan convinced Sophie to go with him on a delivery run. He'd picked up a side gig helping his neighbor, Mr. Patterson, deliver firewood to supplement his income. Sophie insisted on helping, wanting to repay some small fraction of everything Ethan had given her. They loaded the truck together, working in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized from weeks of domestic collaboration. The October day was perfect, crisp and clear, the leaves at their peak of autumn glory. As they drove through the countryside surrounding Cedar Falls, Sophie felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Peace. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Ethan glanced at her, one hand on the wheel. "For what?" "For not asking questions, for just letting me be myself, for seeing me." "Sophie, no, let me finish." She turned in her seat to face him. "In my old life, I was never just Sophie. I was Richard Blake's daughter, the Blake Holdings heiress, a strategic asset in my father's business plans. Every interaction, every relationship, every conversation had an agenda. But you don't want anything from me except for me to be here. That's..." Her voice cracked. "That's everything." Ethan pulled the truck to the side of the road, throwing it into park. He turned to her, his expression intense. "Sophie, I need you to understand something. Whatever happens, whenever your father finds you, whenever you have to run again, these weeks with you they've been the best of my life. You've given Lila and me more than you realize, more than we had any right to hope for. Ethan, I love you." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. "I know it's too soon, I know it's crazy, but I love you. And I need you to know that, so that when you have to go, you'll remember that someone loved you for exactly who you are." Sophie was crying now, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. God help me. I love you too." They kissed desperately, clinging to each other in the cab of the old pickup truck, the autumn afternoon golden around them. And for that moment, they let themselves believe in impossible things, in futures that might never come, in love strong enough to overcome any obstacle, in the fairy tale ending they both knew was probably beyond their reach. They were so lost in each other that neither of them noticed the dark sedan that had followed them from Cedar Falls, or the man inside taking photographs with a long-lens camera, documenting everything. Richard Blake's investigator had finally found his target. The delivery run took longer than expected. By the time Ethan and Sophie returned to Cedar Falls, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. They picked up Lila from Maya's house, the little girl chattering excitedly about the skating party, her cheeks flushed with happiness and sugar from birthday cake. Sophie sat in the back seat with Lila, listening to her animated recounting of every detail, how Maya's older brother had fallen on the ice 3 times, how they'd had pizza with extra cheese, how the birthday girl had gotten roller skates that lit up when you moved. It was mundane and perfect, and Sophie felt her heart swell with the kind of contentment she'd never known existed. "Did you have fun on the delivery?" Lila asked, finally pausing for breath. "We did," Sophie said, catching Ethan's eyes in the rearview mirror. "It was a beautiful afternoon. Daddy was probably boring. He's always talking about wood types and moisture content and stuff nobody cares about." Ethan laughed. "Hey, moisture content is very important. You want your firewood to burn properly." "See? Boring." But Lila was grinning, and Sophie realized this was their language. The teasing, the casual affection, the way they communicated love without ever having to say it directly. She'd never had that with her father. Their conversations had always been formal, transactional, like business meetings between strangers who happened to share DNA. They stopped at the corner store for milk. Lila had reminded them 3 times that they were out, and Sophie stayed in the truck with Lila while Ethan ran inside. Through the window, she watched him joke with the cashier, probably Tom or Tim, another person in this small town who knew Ethan's name and story. Everyone here seemed to know everyone else, their lives interwoven in a way that felt both claustrophobic and comforting. "Sophie?" Lila's voice was unusually serious. "You're not going to leave like my mom did, are you?" Sophie's heart clenched. She turned to face Lila fully, seeing the vulnerability in those wide eyes, the fear that came from already being abandoned once. "Sweetheart, because Daddy really likes you, like, really, really, and I like you too, and if you left, it would make us really sad. Especially Daddy. He tries to hide it, but I can tell." "Lila, I don't want to leave. I love being here with you and your dad." "But you might have to." It wasn't a question. Somehow this 7-year-old understood more than Sophie gave her credit for. "Because of the people looking for you." Sophie froze. "What makes you think people are looking for me?" "I heard you and Daddy talking one night. I wasn't trying to listen, but my room is right there, and sometimes I can't sleep." Lila picked at her seatbelt. "Are they bad people?" "No, not bad exactly, just people from a life I don't want anymore." "Oh." Lila was quiet for a moment. "My mom left because she didn't want our life anymore either. She wanted something different, something better than Daddy and me." The matter-of-fact way Lila said it nearly broke Sophie's heart. "Your mom made a terrible mistake. Your life here with your dad, it's not something to run from. It's something most people would be lucky to have." "Really? Really? Your dad is one of the best people I've ever met, and you—" Sophie reached over to tuck a strand of Lila's hair behind her ear. "You're pretty amazing too. Your mom didn't leave because of anything wrong with you or your dad. Sometimes people are just lost. They don't know how to appreciate what they have until it's gone." "Is that what happened to you? You got lost?" In a way, yes. Sophie had been lost her entire life, wandering through existence that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow within. She'd been lost until a rainy night led her to a sagging porch and a man who offered kindness without expecting anything in return. "I was lost," Sophie said carefully, "but I think I'm finding my way now." Ethan returned with the milk and a bag of gummy bears. "They were on sale," he said defensively when Lila squealed with delight, and they drove the last few blocks home. The streetlights were just flickering on, casting pools of yellow light on the cracked sidewalks. Mrs. Chen waved from her porch, and Ethan honked in response. It was so normal, so beautifully, painfully normal, that Sophie wanted to freeze this moment forever. To live in this single evening where nothing was wrong and everything was possible and the future hadn't yet arrived to destroy what they'd built. But the future was already waiting. They just pulled into the driveway when Sophie saw it, a dark sedan parked across the street, too expensive for this neighborhood, with tinted windows that screamed professional surveillance. Her blood turned to ice. "Ethan," her voice came out strangled. "Ethan, that car." He'd seen it too. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and she watched his jaw clench. "Get Lila inside, now." "Daddy, what's wrong?" Lila had picked up on the sudden tension, her voice uncertain. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just go inside with Sophie, okay? I'll be right there." Sophie wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to come with them, to hide, to run, but one look at his face told her he wouldn't. Ethan Walker might not have money or power, but he had pride and protective instincts, and he wasn't about to let anyone threaten his daughter or the woman he loved. Sophie unbuckled Lila and practically carried her to the house, fumbling with the key, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get it in the lock. Behind her, she heard a car door open, heard footsteps on pavement, heard a voice say, "Mr. Walker, I'd like to have a word with you." They got inside, and Sophie immediately pulled all the curtains closed, her heart hammering. Lila was frightened now, picking up on Sophie's panic. "What's happening? Who is that man?" Just someone asking your dad for directions, probably. It's fine." The lie tasted bitter. Sophie peeked through the curtain and saw Ethan standing in the driveway, arms crossed, facing a man in an expensive suit. Even from here, she could see the tension in every line of Ethan's body. The conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes. The man did most of the talking, gesturing occasionally toward the house. Ethan remained perfectly still, his face carved from stone. Finally, the man handed Ethan something, a business card maybe, and returned to his car. But he didn't leave. He just sat there, waiting, watching. Ethan came inside, and the look on his face confirmed Sophie's worst fears. "Lila, honey, can you go play in your room for a bit? Sophie and I need to talk." "But please, sweetheart, just for a little while." Lila looked between them, saw something that made her swallow her protests, and trudged down the hall. Her door closed with a soft click. Ethan turned to Sophie, and she saw a dozen emotions flicker across his face: anger, fear, resignation, and underneath it all a bone-deep sadness that made her want to weep. "He knows," she whispered. "My father knows I'm here." That was his investigator, Robert Sharp. He showed me pictures of you at the laundromat, walking with Lila, sitting on our porch. He's been watching for days. Ethan's voice was tight, controlled, like he was barely holding himself together. He said Richard Blake is concerned about his daughter's welfare, that he's been searching for weeks, that he just wants to know you're safe. That's a lie. He doesn't care if I'm safe. He cares that I embarrassed him by running, that I disrupted his plans. Sophie, you don't know him, Ethan. You don't know what he's capable of. She was pacing now, her mind racing through possibilities, escape routes, ways to disappear again. I have to leave, tonight. If I leave now, before he gets here, maybe he won't. He's already here. The words hit like a physical blow. What? Sharp said Richard Blake is in Cedar Falls, at the hotel on Main Street. He's waiting until morning to... Ethan swallowed hard. To give you time to say goodbye. Sophie laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. How generous. How perfectly in character. He's giving me permission to have one last night before he drags me back to my cage. You don't have to go with him. You're an adult. He can't force you. Can't he? Sophie spun to face Ethan, and she knew her face must be wild, desperate. You don't understand the kind of power he has. The lawyers, the connections, the ability to make anyone's life a living hell if they get in his way. If I don't go willingly, he'll find a way to force me, and anyone who tries to help me will become collateral damage. I don't care. I do. The words came out as a shout, and Sophie heard Lila's door crack open down the hall. She lowered her voice. I care, Ethan. I care about you and Lila. I won't let him destroy you because of me. So what? You're just going to leave? Go back to that life you hate so much? Marry some stranger because your father demands it? I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know I can't stay here and watch him tear apart everything good I've found. Sophie felt tears streaming down her face. God, I should never have come here. Should never have let you help me. Should never have fallen in love with you. The last words hung in the air between them, a confession and a goodbye all at once. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. These weeks with you have been... Sophie, You've given us so much. You've given me hope. You've given Lila someone to look up to. You've given us a family that's about to be destroyed. Not if you fight, not if we fight together. Sophie pulled back to look at him, saw the determination in his eyes, the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that had probably kept him going through years of struggle and heartbreak. He'll bury you. One phone call to your employer, one whisper in the right ears, and you'll lose your job. He'll make sure you can't find work anywhere. He'll dig into your past, find anything he can use against you, maybe even try to take Lila away. That's what he does. That's who he is. Then let him try. Ethan's voice was steel. Let him do his worst. I'd rather fight and lose than just hand you over without a word. Ethan, a soft knock interrupted them. Lila stood in the doorway, tears streaking her face. Are you leaving, Sophie? The question shattered what little composure Sophie had left. She sank to her knees, opening her arms, and Lila ran to her, burying her face in Sophie's shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment, Sophie breathing in the little girl's smell of her, strawberry shampoo and birthday cake, and innocence. I don't want to, Sophie whispered. I want to stay here with you and your dad forever. But sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do. That's stupid. Lila's voice was muffled against Sophie's shirt. If you love someone, you should get to stay with them. That's how it's supposed to work. You're right. That is how it's supposed to work. Sophie pulled back, gently wiping tears from Lila's cheeks. But the world doesn't always work the way it should. Then we'll make it work different. We'll fight. Right, Daddy? Ethan had come to kneel beside them, and Sophie saw her own anguish reflected in his eyes. Right, sweetheart. But they all knew the truth. In a fight between a single father barely making ends meet and one of the wealthiest men in the country, there was only ever going to be one outcome. That night was the longest of Sophie's life. Lila refused to go to bed, clinging to Sophie like she could hold her there through sheer force of will. They sat together on the couch, all three of them, and watched Disney movies without really seeing them. Lila eventually fell asleep with her head in Sophie's lap, her small hand clutching Sophie's shirt. I could take you away, Ethan said quietly. Right now. Pack up Lila, drain my bank account, and just drive. We could go somewhere he'd never think to look. And then what? Live on the run forever? Move every time we think someone recognizes me? What kind of life would that be for Lila? It would be a life with you in it. Sophie stroked Lila's hair, committing every detail to memory, the way it curled at the ends, the subtle variations in color from dark brown to almost auburn in the right light. She deserves better than that. She deserves a real home, stability, a father who isn't looking over his shoulder every second. She deserves the childhood you're trying to give her. And what do you deserve? The question hung in the air. What did she deserve? Sophie had spent her whole life being told what she deserved by her father. The best schools, the finest clothes, a position in his company, a strategic marriage. But what had she ever chosen for herself? This. She'd chosen this. A shabby little house in a nowhere town with a man who worked too hard and a little girl who needed a mother. She'd chosen honest work that left her hands blistered, burnt pancakes, and evenings on a sagging porch. She'd chosen love, messy and complicated and real. But choosing something and being able to keep it were two very different things. Around midnight, Sophie carefully extracted herself from under Lila's sleeping form and stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold, autumn finally giving way to the coming winter, and she wrapped her arms around herself against the chill. The dark sedan was still there across the street, a silent sentinel ensuring she didn't try to run. The front door opened and closed behind her, and then Ethan's jacket settled around her shoulders, still warm from his body. Can't sleep? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. I keep thinking about what comes next. About having to go back to board meetings and charity galas and pretending to smile while my father parades me around like a trophy. Sophie's voice was flat, emotionless. She'd cried herself empty. About marrying Marcus Ashford, that's the business partner's son. He's 35, arrogant, and sees me as a stepping stone to more power. We've met exactly 4 times, and my father has already started planning the wedding. Don't go, Ethan's voice was rough. Please, Sophie, don't go. I have to. If I don't, he'll make your life a living hell. He'll take everything from you, and I can't. Her voice broke. I can't be responsible for destroying you. What about destroying yourself? Because that's what going back will do. Sophie had no answer for that. They stood in silence, watching their breath turn to mist in the cold air, until finally Ethan spoke again. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her inside to the kitchen and pulled out a worn shoebox from the back of a cabinet. Inside were papers, official documents, bank statements, a few photographs. Ethan spread them on the table. "This is everything I have. My lease, month to month, costs $650. My bank account, currently at $347. My truck, paid off, but needs about $800 in repairs I've been putting off. My credit score, not great, but not terrible." He looked up at her. "This is my life, Sophie. It's not much, but it's mine, and I've built it from nothing, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take it from me without a fight." "Ethan, no, listen. I know your father can make things hard for me. I know he has power and money and resources I can't even imagine. But you know what I have? I have Lila. I have friends in this town who've known me since I moved here 5 years ago. I have a work ethic that's kept me employed through worse. And I have this." He placed his hand over his heart. "I have the certainty that what we have, what the three of us have built over these weeks, is real and worth fighting for." Sophie was crying again, silent tears tracking down her face. "You don't understand what you're saying. You don't understand the kind of man my father is." "Then help me understand. Tell me everything and let me decide if I'm willing to take the risk." So she did. Sophie told him everything she'd been holding back, about Richard Blake's ruthless business practices, the competitors he'd crushed, the politicians he owned, the people who'd crossed him and lived to regret it. She told him about her mother's suspicions before she died, about money that disappeared, about deals that skirted the edge of legality. She told him about the prenuptial agreement her father had already drawn up for her marriage to Marcus, one that would leave her with nothing if she ever tried to leave. "He controls everything," she finished. "My trust fund, my mother's inheritance. It's all tied up in conditions and clauses that mean I can't access any of it until I'm 25. And even then, only if I'm in good standing with the family. If I defy him, I get nothing. And anyone who helps me defy him becomes a target." Ethan absorbed all of this, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Your father sounds like a real piece of work," he finally said. Despite everything, Sophie almost laughed. "That's putting it mildly. But here's the thing, he's not here right now, you are. And between now and whenever he shows up tomorrow, you have a choice to make. You can decide to go back because you're afraid of what he'll do to me. Or you can decide to stay and fight and trust that I'm strong enough to handle whatever he throws at me. It's not about whether you're strong enough. Yes, it is. Sophie, I've survived my wife leaving, being homeless, working 3 jobs while taking care of a baby. I've survived medical bills and car breakdowns and months where I had to choose between rent and food. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but I'm saying I can survive your father's worst. The question is, can you survive going back to that life now that you know there's another option?" Sophie thought about the penthouse, cold and perfect and empty. She thought about Marcus Ashford and his calculating eyes, about a future mapped out in board meetings and strategic alliances. She thought about never seeing Lila's smile again, never feeling Ethan's arms around her, never making burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. Then she thought about what her father might do to them if she stayed, the lawsuits he could file, the pressure he could apply, the 1,000 ways he could make their lives miserable. She thought about Lila growing up under that shadow, about Ethan losing everything he'd built. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "I don't know how to choose between destroying myself and destroying you." Ethan pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Then don't choose tonight. We'll face tomorrow when it comes. For now, just be here. Be with us." They returned to the couch where Lila still slept, and somehow Sophie dozed off, wrapped in Ethan's arms, the 3 of them huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to debris. She woke to pale morning light filtering through the curtains and the sound of car doors closing outside. Her heart lurched. Through the window she saw them, 2 sleek black cars gleaming in the autumn morning like ravens come to claim the dead. And standing beside the first car, tall and imposing in a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Ethan made in 6 months, was Richard Blake. Sophie's father had arrived. Ethan was already awake, had probably been awake for hours. Lila stirred against Sophie's shoulder, opening confused eyes. "Mama." The word was barely audible, probably spoken from some half-remembered dream, but it hit Sophie like a bullet. Lila had never called her that before. "What's happening? Remember yesterday how we talked about how sometimes things don't work out the way we want?" Sophie's voice was surprisingly steady. "That's happening now." "No." Lila sat up, suddenly fully awake. "No, you're not going. Tell him to go away. Tell him you're staying with us." A knock at the door, sharp, authoritative, exactly the kind of knock Richard Blake would use. Ethan stood, his jaw set, and Sophie saw his hands clench into fists before he forced them to relax. "Stay here," he said quietly. "Ethan, don't—" But he was already moving to the door. Sophie heard it open, heard her father's voice, smooth and cultured and cold as winter steel. "Mr. Walker, I'm Richard Blake. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sophie belongs to herself. Legally, as she's still listed as a dependent on my household and her affairs are managed through family trusts, that's debatable. But I'm not here to argue law with you. I'm here to collect my daughter and return her to her proper place. Sophie forced herself to stand, to walk to the door on legs that felt like water. She stopped beside Ethan, and when her eyes met her father's, she saw his expression flicker. Surprise. Then something that might have been hurt, quickly buried under his customary mask of control. "Hello, Father." "Sophia." Richard Blake's gaze swept over her, taking in the borrowed clothes, the work-roughened hands, the house behind her with its peeling paint and second-hand furniture. "You look different." "I am different." "So I see. Living in poverty with a man you barely know, very mature, very well thought out." His tone was acidic. "Do you have any idea how much embarrassment you've caused? How many calls I've had to field? How many questions I've had to dodge about where my daughter disappeared to?" "I'm sorry your image took a hit, Father. That must have been terrible for you." Richard's eyes narrowed at her sarcasm. "Get your things. We're leaving. Now." "No." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Richard Blake was clearly not accustomed to being told no. His face darkened, and Sophie saw the anger he usually kept so carefully contained begin to surface. "I beg your pardon?" "I said no. I'm not going with you." "Sophia, don't be ridiculous. You've had your little adventure, made your point, whatever this was about. Now it's time to come home and be sensible." "This isn't an adventure. This is my life, the life I chose." Richard's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Chose? You think you've chosen this?" He gestured at the house, at Ethan, with barely concealed contempt. "You think love lives in a shack with burnt toast and poverty? You think this man," he said the word like it was something distasteful, "can give you anything worth having? He's given me more than you ever did. I've given you everything. The best education, the best opportunities, a position in one of the most successful companies in the country. You've given me a cage." Sophie's voice was shaking but firm. "A beautiful, expensive cage. But I'd rather be free and poor than rich and trapped." "Free?" Richard's voice dripped with scorn. "You think working in a laundromat is freedom? You think struggling to pay bills and wondering where your next meal comes from is freedom? You're delusional." "Maybe I am, but I'm happy. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy." "You're in shock. You're confused. This—" Richard waved his hand dismissively. "This isn't real, Sophia. It's a fantasy. And when reality sets in, when the novelty wears off and you're left with nothing but struggle and disappointment, you'll realize what a mistake you've made." "The only mistake I made was taking this long to leave." Richard's control finally snapped. "Enough. I've been patient, I've been understanding, but this ends now. You will get in that car, or I will make your friend here regret the day he decided to harbor a runaway." Ethan stepped forward. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Richard turned his cold gaze on Ethan. "I can have you fired with one phone call. I can make sure you never work in this state again. I can open investigations into your fitness as a parent. I'm sure Child Services would be interested to know you've been housing an unrelated young woman, exposing your daughter to who knows what kind of instability. Sophie saw Ethan go pale, saw him glance back toward where Lila was watching from the hallway, her eyes huge with fear. "You wouldn't," Sophie breathed. "Try me." Richard's face was granite. "I've spent 6 weeks searching for you, Sophia. 6 weeks of worry and frustration and dealing with your absence. I'm done playing games. You will come home, or everyone in this pathetic little house will pay the price." "Dad, don't call me that. Daughters respect their fathers. They don't run away and hide like criminals. They don't throw away everything they've been given for—" He looked at Ethan with undisguised disgust. "For this." Sophie felt something break inside her. She looked at Ethan, saw the worry in his eyes. Not for himself, but for Lila. Saw him doing the same calculation she was doing, weighing love against responsibility, desire against duty. She looked at Lila, still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face as she watched the adults in her life decide her fate. And she looked at her father, who stood there like a king issuing edicts, who'd never once asked what she wanted, who saw her as a possession to be retrieved rather than a person to be understood. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Okay, I'll go." "Sophie, no," Ethan started. "I'll go," she repeated louder. "But I have conditions." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "Nevertheless." Sophie straightened, channeling every bit of Blake Steele she'd inherited. "I'll come home. I'll meet with Marcus. I'll even consider the marriage you want. But you leave Ethan and Lila alone, completely alone. No phone calls to his employer, no investigations, no interference in their lives whatsoever. They were helping someone they thought was in trouble. That's all. They don't deserve punishment for basic human kindness." Richard studied her, and Sophie saw him calculating, weighing options. "And if I agree, then I'll get in that car right now. But if I ever find out you've gone back on your word, if you hurt them in any way, I will disappear again. And next time, you'll never find me." It was a bluff. They both knew it. But Richard Blake was a businessman first, and he understood the value of a deal that gave him most of what he wanted. "Very well, your friends remain untouched. Now get your things." Sophie turned back to Ethan and Lila, and the look on their faces nearly destroyed her resolve. She went to them, kneeling in front of Lila first. "I have to go, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. But you said you'd stay as long as you could, and I did. I stayed as long as I possibly could." Sophie was crying now, not caring that her father was watching, that he was seeing her break. "You are the most amazing little girl I've ever met, smart and funny and so incredibly kind. Don't ever lose that, okay? Don't ever let anyone make you hard." "I don't want you to go." Lila was sobbing, clinging to Sophie. "Please don't go, please." Ethan gently pulled Lila away, gathering her into his arms even as his eyes stayed locked on Sophie. The pain in them was unbearable. "Thank you," Sophie said to him, her voice breaking. "Thank you for seeing me, for—" She couldn't finish. There were too many things to say, and none of them were adequate. "Sophie," Ethan's voice was rough. "This isn't over. I'll find a way." "Don't." She pressed her fingers to his lips. "Don't make promises neither of us can keep. Just remember me. Remember that what we had was real." She kissed him then, not caring that her father was watching, that Lila was crying, that the investigator was probably taking photos. She kissed him like it was the last thing she'd ever do, pouring every ounce of love and regret and desperate hope into that single moment. When she pulled away, Ethan whispered, "I love you. I love you too, both of you, always." Sophie forced herself to stand, to walk away from them, to follow her father to the waiting car. She didn't look back, couldn't look back, because if she did, she'd break completely. She'd run back to that house and refuse to leave, consequences be damned. The car door closed behind her with the soft, expensive thunk of German engineering. The leather seat was butter soft, the interior climate-controlled and perfect. It smelled like money and power, and everything she'd been running from. Through the tinted window, she watched Ethan standing on his sagging porch, Lila in his arms, both of them watching her leave. She watched until the car turned the corner and they disappeared from view, and then she finally let herself shatter. Richard sat beside her in silence for several miles before speaking. "You'll thank me for this eventually, when you've had time to think clearly." Sophie didn't answer. She was thinking about burnt pancakes and blistered hands, and a 7-year-old calling her mama in her sleep. She was thinking about how wealth and power felt hollow compared to sitting on a cheap couch watching Disney movies. She was thinking about how she'd just chosen her cage over her freedom, and how it was the only choice that protected the people she loved. "The wedding is scheduled for December," Richard continued, apparently taking her silence as acceptance. "Marcus is looking forward to it. He's quite taken with you." Sophie turned to look at her father, really look at him. She saw the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the expensive clothes that couldn't quite hide how tired he looked. And for the first time, she saw him clearly. Not as an all-powerful tyrant, but as a man who'd lost his wife and didn't know how to love the daughter he had left, so he controlled her instead. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said quietly. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, pain maybe, or regret, but his voice was steady when he replied. "I can live with that, as long as you're safe." "I was safe. I was happy. You were living in squalor with strangers. I was living with people who cared about me. Really cared, not because of my name or my connections or what I could do for them, but just because I existed. When's the last time you cared about me like that, Father?" Richard had no answer. They drove in silence back toward Minneapolis, back toward the penthouse, and the life Sophie had tried so hard to escape. With every mile, she felt pieces of herself being stripped away. The woman who'd worked at Carl's laundromat, who'd braided a little girl's hair, who'd fallen asleep in a man's arms on a worn-out couch. By the time they reached the city, Sophie Blake, heiress, daughter, corporate asset, was fully restored. The girl who'd been just Sophie, who'd been free and poor and happy, was buried so deep that she almost seemed like a dream. Almost. Because late that night, alone in her pristine bedroom with its designer furniture and silk sheets, Sophie could still feel the ghost of Ethan's kiss on her lips, could still hear Lila's laughter, could still remember what it felt like to be loved for exactly who she was. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that this wasn't over. Couldn't be over. Because you can't put someone back in a cage once they've tasted freedom. You can lock the door, you can add more bars, you can make it beautiful and comfortable and filled with everything they're supposed to want, but they'll never stop trying to get back to what they lost. Never. The days that followed Sophie's return blurred together into a gray monotony that felt like drowning in slow motion. The penthouse was exactly as she'd left it, spotless, temperature-controlled, decorated with art that cost more than most people made in a year. It was a museum, not a home, and Sophie moved through it like a ghost haunting her own life. Richard had immediately reinstated her position at Blake Holdings, putting her back in her corner office with its panoramic views of downtown Minneapolis. Her assistant Caroline had welcomed her back with carefully neutral professionalism, asking no questions about where she'd been or why she'd left. The corporate machine simply absorbed her return as if the 6 weeks of her absence had been nothing more than an extended vacation. But Sophie wasn't the same woman who'd run away. She sat through board meetings where they discussed quarterly earnings and market expansion, and all she could think about was Ethan working night shifts to keep his electricity on. She attended business lunches at restaurants where a single meal cost what he made in a day, and she couldn't taste the food. She wore designer suits that cost thousands of dollars and felt like a costume, remembering how right she'd felt in borrowed sweatpants and an old t-shirt. "You seem distracted," Marcus Ashford observed one afternoon. They were having lunch at his club, all dark wood and leather chairs and men in expensive suits making deals over scotch. It was their third date since her return, orchestrated by their fathers to help them reconnect before the wedding. Sophie forced herself to focus on him. Marcus was handsome in the way wealthy men often were. Well-groomed, fit from personal trainers, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. He wasn't cruel exactly, just empty. Like a perfectly rendered portrait with no life behind the eyes. "I'm sorry, just thinking about the Henderson acquisition." "Ah, yes. Your father mentioned you'd been instrumental in the negotiations." Marcus cut into his steak with surgical precision. "I'm glad to see you're taking your responsibilities seriously again. That little episode of yours had people talking." Episode. Sophie tasted the word bitter on her tongue. Is that what we're calling it? What would you prefer? Breakdown? Crisis? Running away like a child? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Whatever it was, it's over now. You're back where you belong. Sophie looked at this man who was supposed to be her future husband and felt absolutely nothing. No attraction, no warmth, no connection, just the cold calculation of a business merger disguised as a marriage. Marcus, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you actually want to marry me? Not as a business arrangement, but as people. Do you want me? He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. Want is an interesting word. I think we're well suited. Compatible goals, similar backgrounds will make a formidable team. That's not what I asked. Sophia. He set down his fork, regarding her with something that might have been patience in someone with actual empathy. What you're really asking is whether this is some grand romance. And the answer is no, of course not. We're adults. We understand that successful marriages are built on partnership and mutual benefit, not some fantasy of love conquering all. What if I want the fantasy? Then you're being naive. Marcus picked up his fork again, the conversation apparently over in his mind. Love fades. Chemistry burns out. But a solid foundation of shared interests and financial security? That lasts. Sophie thought about Ethan's calloused hands carefully bandaging her blisters, about Lila's laughter filling a tiny kitchen, about falling asleep on a sagging couch and feeling more content than she ever had in silk sheets. That was chemistry that burned not out but brighter, love that felt like coming home. I need to use the restroom, she said abruptly, standing. In the bathroom, all marble and gold fixtures and a designer whose name she couldn't remember, Sophie stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was impeccably dressed, perfectly made up, every hair in place. She looked like the old Sophie, the one who'd existed before Cedar Falls. But her eyes were different. There was something in them now, a knowledge, a longing, a barely contained desperation that no amount of concealer could hide. Her phone buzzed, a text from Caroline. Your father wants to see you in his office at 3. Wedding planner needs final decisions on venue. Sophie's hands tightened on the marble counter. The wedding was 6 weeks away. 6 weeks until she'd stand in some elegant venue wearing a dress that cost more than Ethan's yearly salary and promise, forever, to a man who saw her as a business asset. 6 weeks until she became Mrs. Marcus Ashford, and whatever remained of her true self was buried completely. She couldn't do it. The realization hit with crystal clarity. She couldn't go through with this wedding, couldn't spend the rest of her life pretending to be satisfied with partnership and mutual benefit when she knew what real love felt like. But breaking the engagement would mean losing everything. Her position at the company, her trust fund, her father's tenuous affection. It would mean being completely cut off, with no resources and nowhere to go. Except she'd been there before, hadn't she? She'd had nothing in Cedar Falls and she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. She'd worked and earned and built something real with her own hands. Sophie pulled out her phone and did something she'd been forbidden from doing. She searched for Ethan's name, trying to find some trace of him online. There was nothing. No social media, no digital footprint. People like Ethan didn't exist in the virtual world that consumed people like her. They were too busy living real lives to document them. But she found a listing for Walker, E, in Cedar Falls, Minnesota. An address she'd memorized without meaning to. The little house with the sagging porch and the warm lights. She wondered if he thought about her, if Lila still asked about her, if they'd moved on, filling the Sophie-shaped hole in their lives with other people, other routines. The thought made her chest ache. Pull yourself together, she whispered to her reflection. You made your choice. You protected them. That's what matters. But when she returned to the table, smiled at Marcus, and made pleasant conversation about catering options and honeymoon destinations, a part of her was already planning, already calculating, already looking for the escape route she'd need when the cage became too small to breathe in. 3 weeks after her return, Sophie's carefully maintained composure cracked during a fitting for her wedding dress. The designer had created something exquisite, layers of silk and lace, hand-beaded with crystals, with a train that went on forever. It was the kind of dress princesses wore, the kind that appeared in magazines and made other women sigh with envy. Sophie looked at herself in the mirror and wanted to scream. It's perfect, the designer gushed, circling her with pins. Absolutely perfect. You look like a fairy tale. Fairy tales aren't real, Sophie said flatly. The designer laughed, missing the edge in her voice. Well, this is as close as it gets. Your father spared no expense. This is couture at its finest. Sophie's father stood to the side, reviewing something on his phone. He'd insisted on being present for the fitting, as if afraid she might run again if left unsupervised. He'd been watching her constantly since her return, not with love or concern, but with the vigilance of a jailer ensuring his prisoner stayed contained. The wedding is December 15th, Richard said without looking up. All the major players will be there, senators, CEOs, the mayor. This isn't just a wedding, Sophia, it's a statement. The merging of Blake Holdings and Ashford Industries, a dynasty in the making. A business deal, Sophie said quietly. You mean a business deal? Same thing. Richard finally looked up, his expression unreadable. You'll smile, you'll say your vows, and you'll play your part. Is that clear? Crystal. Something in her tone made him set down his phone and really look at her. You're still thinking about him, about that place. It wasn't a question. Sophie met her father's eyes in the mirror, not bothering to deny it. Every day, every hour, every minute. He was nobody. A warehouse worker with a child and a mortgage he can barely afford. What could he possibly give you that you don't already have? Everything that matters. Richard's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. You spent a few weeks playing at poverty, and now you think you understand real life. You don't. Real life is hard and cruel and unforgiving. I've protected you from that. You've protected me from living. There's a difference. Sophia, did you ever love Mom? The question burst out before Sophie could stop it. Really love her? Or was that a merger too? The designer had gone very still, sensing the dangerous shift in the room. Richard's face went carefully blank, the way it always did when emotions threatened to surface. Your mother was an excellent partner. We built a good life together. That's not what I asked. It's the answer you're getting. Richard's voice had gone cold. Your mother understood duty. She understood that personal desires come second to family obligations. It's a lesson you need to learn. Sophie turned away from the mirror, the heavy dress rustling. Mom was miserable. I saw it, even if you didn't. She smiled at the parties and the galas, but at home, she was empty, just going through the motions. And then she got sick, and suddenly it was too late for her to ever be anything else. That's enough. Is it? Because I'm starting to think it's not nearly enough. I'm starting to think we should have talked about this years ago, before you started planning out my entire life like it was a corporate strategy. I've given you every opportunity, every advantage. You've given me a gilded cage. Sophie's voice rose, months of suppressed emotions finally breaking free. You've controlled every aspect of my life since Mom died. My education, my career, my friends, my future husband. When was I supposed to become my own person? When was I supposed to figure out what I actually want? What you want is irrelevant. You're a Blake. You have responsibilities. I'm a person. I'm a human being with thoughts and feelings and dreams, and you treat me like I'm another asset to be managed. Sophie was shaking now, years of compliance and obedience shattering. I met someone, Dad. I met someone who saw me, really saw me, and he didn't care about my last name or my trust fund or what I could do for his career. He just cared about me. And you took that away because it didn't fit your plans. The designer had quietly excused herself, sensing she was witnessing something too personal, too raw. It was just Sophie and Richard in the elegant fitting room, surrounded by mirrors that reflected their confrontation from every angle. That man was using you, Richard said, his voice tight. He saw an opportunity, a wealthy woman running from her problems, and he took advantage. He gave me a place to stay and asked for nothing in return. He worked 2 jobs to keep his daughter fed. He bandaged my hands when I got blisters and never once asked who I was or what I could give him. That's not using someone. That's being a decent human being, something you clearly know nothing about. Richard's face had gone red, a vein throbbing in his temple. You will not speak to me that way. Why not? What are you going to do? Take away my position at the company? Threaten to cut me off? You've already taken everything that mattered. I have nothing left to lose. You have your trust fund, your inheritance, your future. I don't want them. The words echoed in the elegant room. I don't want any of it. Not if it means spending the rest of my life pretending to be happy in a marriage that's really a merger. Not if it means becoming like you, cold and calculating and so focused on wealth and power that you can't even see what it's cost you. And what has it cost me? Richard's voice was dangerous now. Everything. Your wife, your daughter, any chance at real human connection. You're going to die alone in that penthouse, surrounded by expensive things and important people who don't actually care about you. And you'll never understand what you missed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Richard stared at his daughter like he'd never seen her before, like she'd become something incomprehensible. When he finally spoke, his voice was eerily calm. Get out of the dress. We're leaving. Dad, now. The ride home was silent and tense. When they reached the penthouse, Richard went directly to his study and closed the door. Sophie stood in the vast living room, still shaking from adrenaline, and realized she'd just burned a bridge she couldn't uncross. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Her heart leaped. Maybe it was Ethan. Maybe he'd found a way to call. But when she answered, it was her father's lawyer. Miss Blake, I'm calling to inform you that your access to company resources has been temporarily suspended pending a review of your position. Your company credit cards have been deactivated and your office access has been revoked. Mr. Blake will contact you when he's ready to discuss your future with the organization. The call ended before Sophie could respond. She stood there, phone in hand, and started to laugh. It was slightly hysterical, slightly unhinged, but genuine. Her father had actually done it. He'd called her bluff, thinking it would bring her to heel. He didn't understand that she'd already lost everything that mattered. Losing money and position was nothing compared to losing Ethan and Lila. That night, Sophie lay in her designer bed and made a decision. She had 6 weeks until the wedding. 6 weeks to figure out how to escape for good. She couldn't go back to Cedar Falls. That would only put Ethan and Lila in danger again. But she could disappear somewhere else, could find a way to access her mother's inheritance early, could hire lawyers who weren't on her father's payroll, could fight for her freedom legally instead of just running. But all of that required time and resources she didn't have. Unless... Sophie sat up, her mind racing. Her trust fund became accessible when she turned 25, 18 months away. But her mother's inheritance had different conditions. It was supposed to come to her when she married, as a wedding gift from her mother's estate. The prenup her father had drawn up with Marcus would put that money under marital control, effectively giving Richard continued access to it through Marcus. But what if she challenged the prenup? What if she found a lawyer willing to argue that the inheritance should be hers free and clear, regardless of her father's manipulations? It was a long shot. Her father had the best lawyers money could buy. But Sophie had something he didn't: desperation and nothing left to lose. The next morning, she began making calls. Quietly, carefully, using a burner phone she bought with the last of her cash. She found a lawyer 3 states away, someone with no connections to her father's network, someone willing to take on a case against Richard Blake if the retainer was big enough. I don't have money now, Sophie told him honestly. But if we win, if I get access to my mother's inheritance, you'll get 20%. That's close to $4 million. The lawyer, a man named David Chen, was quiet for a moment. That's a hell of a gamble on your part. If we lose, you get nothing. I already have nothing. At least this way I'm fighting for something. When's the wedding? 6 weeks. That's not much time to build a case. Then we work fast. David Chen agreed, drawn by the challenge and the potential payout. They began building a case based on her mother's original will, arguing that the inheritance was meant to be Sophie's independent property, not marital assets. It was technical and complicated, and Sophie understood maybe half of it, but it was a lifeline. And then, 3 weeks before the wedding, everything fell apart. Sophie received a call from the hospital, not the elegant, expensive hospital in downtown Minneapolis where the wealthy received their care, but Cedar Falls Community Hospital, small, understaffed, perpetually underfunded. Miss Blake? This is Nurse Morrison from Cedar Falls Community. We have a young girl here, Lila Walker, who was admitted this morning with a severe infection. She's been asking for you. Says you're... The nurse paused, checking notes. Says you're like her mom. Her father gave us this number to try. Sophie's world tilted. What's wrong with her? Is she okay? She has sepsis from an untreated infection. We've started her on antibiotics, but she needs to be transferred to a larger facility with better resources. The problem is, another pause, this one heavier. Mr. Walker doesn't have insurance. He can't afford the deposit for the transfer or the treatment she needs. He's with her now, and he's not handling it well. I'm coming, right now. Don't do anything. Don't discharge her. Don't just tell them I'm covering it, all of it, everything she needs. Sophie was moving as she talked, grabbing her keys, her wallet, not bothering to change out of her designer dress. She flew down to the parking garage, got in her car, a Mercedes her father had given her for her 21st birthday, and broke every speed limit between Minneapolis and Cedar Falls. The 2-hour drive felt like an eternity. Sophie's mind conjured worst-case scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Lila's bright smile gone forever. Ethan losing his daughter because he couldn't afford to save her. Both of them hating Sophie for leaving, for not being there when they needed her most. She burst into the hospital's emergency room, still in her expensive dress and heels, completely out of place in the small-town facility. Lila Walker, where is she? The woman at the desk looked startled. Room 4, but... Sophie didn't wait. She found room 4 and pushed through the door to find Ethan sitting beside a hospital bed, his head in his hands. Lila lay there, so small and pale against the white sheets, IVs running into her thin arms. She looked like a ghost of the vibrant child Sophie remembered. Ethan? He looked up, and the devastation in his eyes nearly broke her. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, like he'd aged years in the weeks since she'd left. His clothes were wrinkled, his face unshaven, and when he saw her, something crumbled in his expression. Sophie, God, Sophie, I didn't know who else to call. I didn't want to drag you back into this, but she kept asking for you, and I can't. His voice broke. I can't afford the treatment. They want $40,000 just to transfer her to Minneapolis Children's Hospital. And I've got $300 in my bank account and a truck that's worth maybe $2,000 if I'm lucky. Sophie crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her arms around him. He buried his face in her shoulder, and she felt him shaking, felt the desperate fear of a parent watching their child suffer. It's okay. I've got it. I've got all of it. She pulled back to look at him. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not this time. You can't. Your father. I don't care about my father. I don't care about the wedding or the money or any of it. I care about you and Lila. That's all that matters. A weak voice came from the bed. Sophie? Sophie went to Lila's side, taking the little girl's hand carefully, mindful of the IV. Hey, sweetheart. I'm here. You came back. Lila's eyes were glassy with fever, but her smile was pure relief. I knew you would. I told Daddy you'd come back if we needed you. Of course I came back. I love you. Both of you. Sophie smoothed Lila's hair back from her forehead. And we're going to get you better, the best doctors, the best hospital, whatever you need. Promise? I promise. Sophie left Ethan with Lila and found the nurse. I need to speak to whoever's in charge. Now. 20 minutes and several phone calls later, Sophie had arranged for Lila's immediate transfer to Minneapolis Children's Hospital, one of the best pediatric facilities in the region. She put everything on her personal credit card, the one her father hadn't thought to cancel because it was in her name alone, left over from college. Bill everything to me, she told the administrator, sliding the card across the desk. Sophie Blake, every procedure, every medication, every night in the hospital, all of it goes on this card. Mr. Walker is not to receive a single bill. The administrator looked at the name on the card, recognition flickering in her eyes. Blake? As in Richard Blake? That's right. My father's lawyers will probably call you within the hour to cancel the charges. When they do, you tell them that this is my card, my decision, and I'm an adult who can incur my own debts. If they have a problem with that, they can sue me. Miss Blake, it's not negotiable. That little girl in there is the closest thing I have to family. Closer than blood, anyway. She needs help, and I'm providing it. End of discussion. The administrator nodded slowly, clearly sensing that arguing would be pointless. We'll have the ambulance ready for transfer within the hour. Sophie returned to room 4 to find Lila asleep and Ethan still sitting beside her bed, holding her hand like he could keep her tethered to life through sheer force of will. I don't know how to thank you, he said without looking away from his daughter. I don't know how I can ever repay. Stop. Sophie sat down beside him. This isn't about repayment. This is about family. And like it or not, you two are my family. The only real family I've ever had. Your father is going to lose his mind. Probably. But I'm done letting him dictate my life. I'm done choosing his approval over what matters. She took Ethan's free hand, lacing their fingers together. I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I let him bully me into going back. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt us all. You were trying to do the right thing. The right thing is being here. With you. With Lila. Everything else is just noise. They sat together in the sterile hospital room, holding hands over Lila's sleeping form, and Sophie felt something settle in her chest. This was where she belonged. Not in a penthouse or a corner office, not at business lunches or charity galas. Here, in this moment, with these people who loved her for who she was and not what she represented. The ambulance arrived, and they transferred Lila with careful efficiency. Sophie rode with them, refusing to leave the little girl's side, while Ethan followed in his truck. The drive back to Minneapolis felt surreal. Sophie had fled this city hours ago, desperate to reach Cedar Falls. Now she was returning, but everything was different. At Minneapolis Children's Hospital, they were met by a team of specialists. The best doctors, because Sophie had made it clear that money was no object. They whisked Lila away for tests and treatment, leaving Sophie and Ethan in a private waiting room that probably cost more per hour than Ethan made in a day. This is crazy, Ethan said, looking around at the expensive furniture, the flat-screen TV, the coffee service that rivaled what you'd find in a luxury hotel. This isn't... People like me don't get treatment in places like this. They do now. Sophie poured them both coffee, real coffee, from actual beans, not the instant kind Ethan kept in his kitchen. Because Lila deserves the best, and so do you. Sophie, I can't let you pay for all this. It's too much. It's not nearly enough. And anyway, it's my money, my choice. My father might control my trust fund and my inheritance, but this credit card is mine alone. I've never used it much. What's the point when everything's already provided? But I've been building credit for years. The limit is high enough to cover Lila's treatment and then some. And when your father finds out? Then he finds out. Sophie set down her coffee cup with more force than necessary. I'm done living in fear of his disapproval. I'm done pretending that his version of my life is the only option. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and Sophie saw the exact moment when he stopped arguing, when he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The wedding, he said. It's in 3 weeks. There's not going to be a wedding. I already have a lawyer working on getting me access to my mother's inheritance. Once I have that money, I'll be financially independent. My father won't be able to control me anymore. And if the lawyer can't do it, then I'll figure something else out. But I'm not marrying Marcus Ashford. I'm not spending the rest of my life in a cage, no matter how gilded it is. Sophie moved closer, taking both of Ethan's hands. I'm in love with you, completely, impossibly, irrationally in love with you. And I know it's crazy. We've only known each other for a few months, and those months were hardly normal circumstances. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you too. Ethan pulled her close, and Sophie let herself sink into his embrace, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. But Sophie, you need to understand what you're giving up. Your father's not going to just let this go. He's going to fight you with everything he has. Let him. I'm not the scared girl who ran away anymore. I'm the woman who worked at a laundromat, who learned how to fight for what she wants, who found out she's stronger than anyone ever gave her credit for, including myself. They stayed in the waiting room for hours, drinking terrible hospital coffee and talking in quiet voices about everything and nothing. About Lila's condition, about Sophie's father's inevitable reaction, about what the future might look like if they could somehow make this work. Around midnight, a doctor emerged with good news. Lila's fever had broken, the antibiotics were working, and while she'd need to stay hospitalized for several days, her prognosis was excellent. She's asking for both of you, the doctor said with a knowing smile. Says she won't sleep until she sees her parents. Neither Sophie nor Ethan corrected her. They found Lila awake in a private room that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital. She was still pale but more alert, her eyes brightening when she saw them. "Daddy! Sophie! They have video games here! And the bed goes up and down when you push buttons!" Despite everything, the fear, the exhaustion, the looming confrontation with Richard Blake, Sophie found herself laughing. This was Lila, irrepressible even in a hospital bed, finding joy in automatic beds and video games. "That's pretty cool, sweetheart," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but better." "Sophie, are you staying? Or do you have to go back to your fancy house?" Sophie looked at this little girl who'd somehow become her daughter in everything but name, at Ethan standing beside her with hope and fear warring in his eyes, and made her choice. "I'm staying," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. Not now, not ever." "Promise?" "I promise." Lila's smile could have lit up the entire hospital. "Good, because we're a family now, right? You and me and Daddy? That's what families do. They stay together." "That's exactly what families do," Sophie agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "And we're going to stay together, no matter what." As Lila drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that her family was complete, Sophie received the call she'd been dreading. Her father's name flashed on her phone screen, and she stepped into the hallway to answer it. "Hello, Father." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard's voice was ice and fury. "I just got a call from the hospital about charges on your credit card. $40,000 for some child's medical treatment?" "Have you lost your mind?" "No. For the first time in my life, I think I've found it. You will reverse those charges immediately. You will come home, and you will finish preparing for your wedding. This nonsense ends now." "You're right about one thing. It does end now, but not the way you think." Sophie took a deep breath, drawing strength from the knowledge that just beyond this door, her real family was waiting. "I'm not coming home. I'm not marrying Marcus. And I'm not letting you control my life anymore. If you do this, you're cut off completely. No money, no position, no inheritance. You'll have nothing. I'll have everything that matters: love, family, freedom, things you've never understood the value of. You're making a mistake that will ruin your life. Maybe, but it'll be my mistake to make. My life to ruin or build as I see fit. I'm done living your version of my story, Dad. It's time I wrote my own." Sophie ended the call before her father could respond. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding, but underneath the fear was something else. Exhilaration, liberation, the terrifying, wonderful freedom of finally taking control of her own destiny. She returned to Lila's room to find Ethan watching her, questions in his eyes. "So," he said quietly, "how did he take it?" "About as well as expected. I'm officially cut off from the Blake empire." "And how do you feel about that?" Sophie looked around the hospital room, at Lila sleeping peacefully, at Ethan standing ready to catch her if she fell, at the life she was choosing over wealth and status and everything she was supposed to want. "I feel free," she said simply. "For the first time in my life, I feel completely, terrifyingly, wonderfully free." And in that moment, with nothing but uncertainty ahead and everything that had once defined her stripped away, Sophie had never been more certain that she'd made the right choice. The morning after Sophie's confrontation with her father, she woke up in a chair beside Lila's hospital bed, her neck stiff and her designer dress wrinkled beyond repair. Ethan had fallen asleep in the other chair, his hand still holding Lila's even in sleep. The early dawn light filtered through the hospital window, painting everything in soft shades of gold and pink. And for a moment, Sophie just watched them, her family, chosen not by blood, but by love. Her phone had 17 missed calls from her father, 12 from Marcus, and dozens of texts from people at Blake Holdings asking where she was and whether the rumors were true. Sophie silenced it all and slipped out to find coffee, navigating the quiet hospital corridors in bare feet, her expensive heels abandoned somewhere in the previous day's chaos. In the hospital cafeteria, she bought coffee with what little cash she had left in her wallet and sat by a window overlooking the city. Minneapolis spread out before her, the city where she'd grown up, where she'd spent 23 years living someone else's vision of her life. It looked different now, less like a prison and more like just another place, no more or less important than Cedar Falls. Miss Blake? Sophie turned to find a woman in her 50s wearing scrubs and a kind expression. Her name tag read Dr. Patricia Morrison, Pediatrics. I'm Lila's attending physician. I wanted to talk to you about her prognosis. Sophie's heart clenched. Is she okay? Last night they said, she's doing wonderfully. The infection is responding to treatment better than we hoped. She'll need to stay another 3 or 4 days for observation, but she should make a full recovery. Dr. Morrison sat down across from Sophie, her expression gentle. What I really wanted to talk about was the financial arrangements. The billing department informed me that you've taken responsibility for all charges, but Miss Blake, we're talking about potentially over $100,000 by the time treatment is complete. Are you certain? I'm certain. Whatever she needs, whatever it costs, I'll handle it. Dr. Morrison studied her for a moment. You're not Lila's biological mother. It wasn't a question, but Sophie answered anyway. No, but I love her like she is. And her father, he's worked himself to the bone trying to provide for her. He shouldn't lose his daughter because he can't afford to save her. The system is broken, Dr. Morrison said quietly. I see it every day. Good parents, good people, forced to make impossible choices because healthcare in this country is tied to wealth rather than need. What you're doing for that family is extraordinary. It's the bare minimum. It's what anyone with resources should do. But most don't. Most people with your kind of money, and yes, I know who your father is, they donate to charity galas and put their names on hospital wings. They don't personally bankrupt themselves for a stranger's child. Sophie thought about the countless charity events she'd attended over the years, writing checks for causes she barely understood, smiling for photographers beside her father while they pretended to care about issues that never touched their actual lives. Those people don't know what it's like to have nothing, Sophie said. I did. For a little while, I knew what it was like to work until your hands bled and still not have enough. To worry about keeping the lights on. To be one emergency away from losing everything. It changes you, or it should, anyway. Dr. Morrison smiled. Lila's lucky to have you. And so is her father. Not many people would stand up to Richard Blake for anyone, let alone for love. After the doctor left, Sophie returned to Lila's room to find both Ethan and Lila awake. Lila was sitting up in bed, looking infinitely better than the night before, while Ethan helped her navigate the breakfast menu on the room's tablet. Sophie! Lila's face lit up. They have pancakes. Real ones, not burnt ones. No offense, Daddy. None taken, sweetheart. Hospital pancakes are definitely superior to mine. Sophie kissed the top of Lila's head, breathing in the little girl's smell of her mixed with hospital soap and antiseptic. How are you feeling, honey? Better. The doctor said I can probably go home in a few days. And Sophie, this room has its own bathroom, with a shower, and the TV has like 100 channels. The simple joy in Lila's voice, excitement over basic amenities that Sophie had always taken for granted, was both heartbreaking and beautiful. This child who'd grown up with so little found wonder in everything. I'm glad you're feeling better. You gave us quite a scare. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get sick. Daddy says I have to be more careful about washing my hands and stuff. It's not your fault, baby, Ethan said gently. Sometimes our bodies just need help fighting off the bad stuff. That's what hospitals are for. After Lila had eaten and been whisked away for more tests, Sophie and Ethan found themselves alone in the room. The tension that had been building since yesterday finally surfaced. We need to talk, Ethan said, about what happens next. Sophie nodded, steeling herself. I know. I've been thinking about it all night. My father's cut me off completely. My credit card will probably be canceled soon. I'm surprised it hasn't been already. My lawyer says the inheritance case could take months, maybe years if my father fights it, which he will. So you'll have no money, no place to live once your father kicks you out of the penthouse. That's about the size of it, yes. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking exhausted. Sophie, I can't take care of you. I can barely take care of Lila and myself. My house is falling apart. I'm behind on every bill, and now with Lila's medical scare, I'm going to have to pick up even more shifts to make up for the time I've missed. I know. I'm not asking you to take care of me. I can get a job. A real job, not just temporary work. I have a degree. I have skills. I can support myself. Doing what? Your entire work history is at your father's company. Do you think he's going to give you a good reference? Do you think any company in Minneapolis is going to hire you when Richard Blake makes it clear you're persona non grata? Sophie's jaw tightened. Then I'll go somewhere else, somewhere his influence doesn't reach. There is nowhere his influence doesn't reach. The man is a billionaire with connections across the entire country. Sophie, you're not thinking clearly. You're making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. You're right. I am making decisions based on emotion, based on love, based on the fact that I've spent 23 years living logically according to my father's plans, and I was miserable. At least this way, if I fail, if I end up broke and struggling, it'll be because of my own choices. And what about Lila? What about us? You say you love us, but love isn't enough to pay rent or buy groceries or keep the heat on. I learned that the hard way when Melissa left. The comparison stung. Sophie felt tears burn her eyes. I'm not her. I'm not leaving because things got hard. I'm staying because things are hard, and I'm choosing you anyway. Are you? Or are you choosing an idea of us, the fantasy of playing house with the poor single dad and his cute daughter? Because that's what this feels like sometimes, Sophie. Like you're living out some romance novel where love conquers all and money doesn't matter. That's not fair, isn't it? You've never had to worry about money, not really. You spent 6 weeks at my house and yeah, you worked at the laundromat and you helped with bills, but you always knew you had an escape hatch. You always knew you could go back to your father's wealth if things got too hard. But now you're burning that bridge, and I don't think you understand what that really means. Sophie felt something crack inside her chest. You think I don't understand sacrifice? You think I don't know what I'm giving up? Ethan, I'm walking away from $20 million, from a life of security and comfort and never having to worry about anything. I'm doing that for you, for us. I never asked you to. I know, that's the point. You never asked for anything. You never expected anything. You just loved me, and that was enough. But now you're standing here telling me my love isn't enough? That I'm not capable of handling a life outside my father's control? I'm saying I'm terrified. Ethan's voice cracked. I'm terrified that you're going to wake up in 6 months and realize that love doesn't keep you warm when the electricity's cut off. That it doesn't fill your stomach when the fridge is empty. That it doesn't fix a leaking roof or pay for car repairs or cover doctor bills. And when that happens, you're going to resent me. You're going to wish you'd stayed in your gilded cage. And then you'll leave, and Lila will be heartbroken all over again. The raw fear in his voice stopped Sophie's anger cold. This wasn't about her capabilities or her commitment. This was about a man who'd already been abandoned once, who'd watched his wife walk away when reality didn't match the fantasy, who was now watching history repeat itself. Sophie crossed the room and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. I am not Melissa. I'm not going to wake up one day and decide I made a mistake. Yes, I've had privilege. Yes, I've had wealth. But you know what I never had until I met you? Peace. Happiness. The feeling of being valued for who I am instead of what I represent. That's not a fantasy, Ethan. That's real. That's more real than anything I ever had before. Sophie, no, let me finish. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm going to struggle with things that are second nature to you. I'm going to burn dinner and mess up laundry and probably make 1,000 mistakes. But I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to work and fight and scrape by. Because at the end of the day, I'll be with you and Lila. That's what matters. Not the money, not the comfort. You two. Ethan pulled her close and Sophie felt him shaking. I'm so scared of losing you, both of you. If something happens to Lila because I can't afford proper care, if you leave because this life is too hard, I don't think I'd survive it. Then it's a good thing I'm not going anywhere. And it's a good thing we're going to make sure Lila gets every bit of care she needs, whatever it takes. They held each other in the quiet hospital room, two people from completely different worlds trying to build a bridge between them. It wasn't going to be easy. Sophie knew that. But nothing worth having ever was. Over the next 3 days, while Lila recovered, Sophie began the practical work of dismantling her old life and building a new one. She contacted David Chen, her lawyer, who confirmed that Richard Blake was indeed fighting the inheritance claim with everything he had. He's arguing that your mother's will specified the inheritance was for establishing a household which he's interpreting as requiring a marriage he approves of, David explained over the phone. It's a stretch, legally, but he has expensive lawyers making the argument. How long until we know if I can access the money? Could be 6 months. Could be 2 years. Courts move slowly, especially when both sides have resources to drag things out. Sophie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of reality settling on her shoulders. Okay, then I need to figure out another way to support myself. There is one other option, David said carefully. Your mother's will also established a smaller trust, about $500,000, that was supposed to be accessible when you turned 25, separate from your father's control. We might be able to argue for early access based on financial hardship and your father's vindictive behavior. How soon could we make that happen? A few months, maybe. It's not guaranteed, but it's more likely than getting the full inheritance released. The trust was specifically designed to give you some independence. It wasn't perfect, but it was hope. Sophie thanked David and hung up, her mind already spinning with possibilities. $500,000 wouldn't last forever, but invested wisely, it could provide a cushion while she figured out the rest of her life. On Lila's 4th day in the hospital, Sophie received a visitor she hadn't expected. Marcus Ashford appeared in the doorway of Lila's room, looking distinctly uncomfortable in his expensive suit amid the cheerful pediatric decor. Sophia, may I speak with you, privately? Sophie glanced at Ethan, who nodded slightly, and followed Marcus into the hallway. They walked to a small consultation room, and Marcus closed the door behind them. I'm not here to convince you to come back, he said, without preamble. Your father asked me to, but honestly, I think you made the right choice. Sophie stared at him in shock. What? You heard me. I think you're right to walk away from all of it, the marriage, the company, the whole charade. Marcus sat down, running a hand over his face in a gesture that made him look suddenly human instead of corporate. Sophia, I'm gay. Have been my whole life. My father knows, doesn't care, thinks I can just manage it discreetly while maintaining the appearance of a proper marriage. When he suggested I marry you, I agreed because it solved a lot of problems. You'd get the life you were raised for, I'd get the cover I needed, and both our fathers would get their business merger. Marcus, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. No one does, except my father and a few trusted confidants. That's the point. But watching you these past weeks, seeing you willing to give up everything for actual love, it made me realize how much I've compromised, how much I've let my father's expectations dictate my life. Sophie sat down across from him, seeing Marcus clearly for the first time, not as an obstacle or an unwanted fiancé, but as another person trapped in Richard Blake's manipulations. What are you going to do? I'm breaking the engagement, officially. My father is furious, but I don't care anymore. I'd rather be authentic and struggle than continue living a lie. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his face. You inspired me, Sophia. If you can walk away from all that money and power, I can walk away from my father's expectations. Thank you for telling me and for supporting the decision. Thank you for having the courage to make it first. Marcus stood. For what it's worth, your father is making your life as difficult as possible. He's calling in favors, spreading word that you're unstable and unreliable. You're going to have a hard time finding work in Minneapolis. I figured as much. But I have some connections outside his network, places that value competence over politics. If you need references or introductions, let me know. Consider it my apology for being complicit in your imprisonment, even if unknowingly. After Marcus left, Sophie returned to Lila's room feeling lighter. One obstacle removed, even if hundreds more remained. Ethan raised an eyebrow in question. Marcus broke off the engagement, Sophie said. Turns out he has his own reasons for not wanting to marry me. We're both free. One problem down, Ethan said quietly. Hundreds to go, Sophie finished. But we'll figure it out, one step at a time. Lila was discharged 2 days later, healthy and energetic, already complaining about having to leave the hospital with its video games and room service. The final bill came to just over $87,000, more than Ethan would make in 3 years. Sophie's credit card went through, though she knew her father could still contest the charges. She'd deal with that when it happened. They drove back to Cedar Falls in Ethan's truck, Lila chattering excitedly in the back seat about everything she was going to tell her friends at school. Sophie watched the city fade in the rearview mirror and felt no regret. This was the right choice. It was the only choice. But when they pulled up to Ethan's house, Sophie's certainty wavered. The little structure looked even more run down than she remembered. The porch sagging ominously, the paint peeling in sheets. This was going to be her home now. No penthouse, no hotel-like hospital rooms, just this small, broken house and the people inside it. "It's not much," Ethan said quietly, following her gaze. "It's perfect," Sophie said, and meant it. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a new rhythm. Sophie moved what few possessions she'd retrieved from the penthouse into Ethan's house. A single suitcase of clothes, her mother's jewelry box, and nothing else. Ethan insisted she take his bedroom while he slept on the couch, but Sophie refused. They compromised on sharing the room, though both were careful to maintain propriety for Lila's sake. Sophie found work at a local nonprofit that helped low-income families navigate social services. Ironic, given her background, but the director, a fierce woman named Janet Rodriguez, saw past Sophie's pedigree to her genuine desire to help. "Your father called me," Janet said during Sophie's first week. "Tried to convince me you were unstable, and I shouldn't have hired you." Sophie's heart sank. "I understand if you need to let me go." "Let you go? Hell no. Anyone Richard Blake hates that much is probably doing something right. Plus, you're good at this work. You have empathy these families need. You've been there. Maybe not the exact situation, but you understand what it's like to feel powerless. That's valuable." The pay was modest, $32,000 a year, a fraction of what Sophie would have made at Blake Holdings. But it was honest work that mattered. She helped families fill out Medicaid applications, connected them with food banks and utility assistance, advocated for them when systems failed. And every person she helped reminded her why she'd made the choice she did. Evenings were spent at the house with Ethan and Lila. Sophie learned to cook properly, no longer burning everything she touched. She helped Lila with homework, braided her hair every morning, attended parent-teacher conferences with Ethan. They fixed what they could in the house. Sophie learning how to use tools, how to patch drywall, how to make do with limited resources. It was hard, harder than anything Sophie had ever done. There were nights when the heat didn't work, and they huddled together under blankets. Days when Sophie's feet ached from standing all day at work, when the bills piled up faster than they could pay them, when she wondered if love really was enough. But then Lila would laugh at something silly, or Ethan would pull Sophie close on the sagging porch and tell her she was beautiful, or they'd share a meal they'd made together, and Sophie would remember why every struggle was worth it. 3 months after Lila's hospital stay, David Chen called with news. The court had agreed to release Sophie's smaller trust fund early, citing her father's controlling behavior and her genuine financial need. It wasn't the full inheritance, but $500,000 would change everything. "What do you want to do with it?" Ethan asked that evening after Lila was asleep. They sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the November cold, watching their breath mist in the air. Sophie had been thinking about this since David's call. "I want to invest most of it, safe, boring investments that will give us security long term. But some of it, I want to use now for things that matter." "Like what?" "Like fixing this house properly. Like setting up a college fund for Lila. Like buying you a truck that doesn't break down twice a month. Like," Sophie took a deep breath, "like maybe starting something of our own. A business. Something we build together." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of business?" "Remember how you said you always wanted to open a restaurant? What if we did that? Not a fancy place, but something simple. Comfort food, honest prices, a place where people like us can afford to eat. We could call it Walker's Corner or something. Make it a real family business." "Sophie, running a restaurant is incredibly risky. Most fail in the first year. So did running away from my father. So did falling in love with you. So did every good decision I've ever made. I'm kind of done playing it safe." Ethan laughed, pulling her closer. "You're crazy, you know that? Crazy about you. Is there a difference?" They spent the next several months planning. Sophie kept her job at the nonprofit. The work mattered too much to abandon, but nights and weekends were devoted to building their dream. They found a small space near the park in Cedar Falls, formerly a coffee shop that had gone under. The rent was manageable, the location perfect for foot traffic. Ethan handled the food, developing a menu of the comfort dishes his mother used to make: pot roast, meatloaf, chicken chin and dumplings, homemade soups. Sophie handled the business side, though she was learning as she went, figuring out permits and suppliers and all the mundane logistics that went into running a restaurant. They did most of the renovation work themselves, with help from friends they'd made in Cedar Falls. Carl from the laundromat helped with plumbing. Mrs. Chen sewed curtains. Janet from the nonprofit connected them with out-of-work contractors willing to trade services for meals. The community wrapped around them, supporting this venture in ways that reminded Sophie why small towns mattered. Lila was their most enthusiastic helper, convinced that being part of a family business made her infinitely cooler than her classmates. She insisted on having a role: official greeter and quality control tester for desserts. "Someone has to make sure the brownies are good enough," she said seriously. "It's an important job." 6 months after leaving her father's world, Sophie stood in Walker's Corner on opening day and felt something she'd never experienced at Blake Holdings: pride. Not the artificial pride of her father's approval or corporate achievements that meant nothing, but real pride in something she'd built with her own hands. The restaurant was small and imperfect. The tables were mismatched secondhand finds, the walls painted by hand, the menu written on chalkboards Lila had decorated with drawings. It was nothing like the elegant restaurant Sophie had grown up dining in. It was better. "You ready?" Ethan asked, his hand finding hers. "Terrified," Sophie admitted. "What if no one comes? What if the food's terrible? What if we've made a huge mistake?" "Then we'll figure it out. Together. That's what we do." They opened the doors, and people came. Not a flood, but a steady stream. People from town who'd watched them work on the space, who'd known Ethan for years, who were curious about the former heiress who'd given up everything for love. The food was good, the prices fair, the atmosphere warm. By closing time, they were exhausted but exhilarated. They'd made enough to cover expenses and then some. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest money earned through their own efforts. "We did it," Sophie said, collapsing into a chair while Lila cleaned tables with far more enthusiasm than effectiveness. "We actually did it." "We did," Ethan agreed, sitting beside her. "And we'll do it again tomorrow. And the day after that. Until we can't anymore, or until we build something sustainable. Either way, we did it together." That night, after Lila was asleep and the house was quiet, Ethan and Sophie sat on their porch, newly reinforced and no longer sagging, and talked about the future. "I got a letter from my father today," Sophie said quietly. "First contact in 6 months. His lawyers are still fighting the inheritance claim, but he said he's willing to talk, to discuss terms for reconciliation." "What kind of terms?" "The usual. Come back to Blake Holdings in some capacity, resume a relationship with him, stop embarrassing the family name. In exchange, he'll release some of my mother's inheritance and stop actively sabotaging my life." "What do you want to do?" Sophie thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, desperate, trapped, willing to run away in the night rather than face another day in her father's world. She thought about the woman she'd become, scarred and struggling, but fundamentally happy, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was. "I want to write him back and tell him I'm exactly where I want to be, that his money doesn't interest me anymore, and his approval means nothing compared to the life I've built." "But," Sophie paused, surprised by her own thoughts, "but I also want to tell him that if he ever wants to know his granddaughter, because that's what Lila is to me now, he knows where to find us. That the door isn't completely closed if he's willing to walk through it as a father instead of a tyrant." "You think he'll take you up on it?" "Probably not. Richard Blake doesn't do things on other people's terms, but at least I'll know I tried, that I was the bigger person." Ethan pulled her close, and Sophie rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, coffee and cooking and home. "I love you," she said, the words no longer scary but simply true. "I love this life we've built, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts because they're ours. I love you too, and I'm sorry I ever doubted you. Sorry I compared you to Melissa. You've proven yourself 1,000 times over. I'll probably have to prove myself 1,000 more before you completely believe I'm not going anywhere. Probably, but I've got time." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the November sky. Somewhere in Minneapolis, Richard Blake was probably working late in his office, surrounded by expensive things and important people, completely alone. Sophie felt a twinge of pity for him, not enough to regret her choices, but enough to hope that someday he might understand what he'd missed. Inside the house, Lila called out, "Sophie, can you come tuck me in and tell me the story about the princess who chose adventure?" "That's you," Ethan said softly. "The princess who chose adventure." "No," Sophie corrected, standing and pulling him up with her. "I'm the girl who chose love. There's a difference." She went inside to find Lila already in bed, her room warm and safe, decorated with drawings she'd made of their family, always 3 stick figures labeled Daddy, me, and Sophie. Never 2. Always 3. "Tell me the story," Lila demanded, snuggling under her blankets. "Once upon a time," Sophie began, sitting on the edge of the bed, "there was a girl who lived in a tower. A beautiful tower, with everything she could ever want, except the one thing that mattered most: freedom. So one day, when the rain was falling and the night was dark, she climbed out a window and ran." She told the story while Lila's eyes grew heavy, while Ethan leaned in the doorway watching them, while the house settled around them with all its familiar creaks and groans. She told the story of a girl who found a family in the most unexpected place, who learned that home wasn't a building, but the people inside it, who discovered that love required courage, but gave back more than it asked. When Lila finally fell asleep, Sophie and Ethan retreated to their own room, small and simple, with secondhand furniture and walls that needed repainting. A year ago, Sophie would have been horrified by its shabbiness. Now she saw only its potential, only its warmth, only the life they were building together within its walls. "No regrets?" Ethan asked, pulling her close as they lay in the darkness. Sophie thought about everything she'd given up: wealth, status, security, the approval of her father. She thought about everything she'd gained: love, family, purpose, the knowledge that she was strong enough to build a life on her own terms. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "Best decision I ever made." "Running away in the rain?" "No. Walking through your door and deciding to stay." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over logic, who'd built something real and lasting from nothing more than burnt pancakes and borrowed sweatpants and a stubborn refusal to accept that their different worlds meant they couldn't be together. 3 years later, Walker's Corner was a Cedar Falls institution. They'd expanded twice, hired staff, and somehow made a success of the impossible. Sophie had gone back to school part-time, finishing her degree in art history just because she could, just because it made her happy. Ethan had written a cookbook of his mother's recipes that had modest but steady sales. Lila was thriving in 5th grade, confident and kind, already talking about becoming a chef like her dad. And Richard Blake finally came to visit. He arrived unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, stepping out of a town car that looked absurdly out of place on their quiet street. Sophie saw him through the restaurant window and felt her breath catch, not with fear anymore, but with something more complicated. This was still her father, after all. The relationship might be broken, but the connection remained. "I'll handle it," Ethan said quietly, but Sophie shook her head. "No, we handle it together. That's how we do things now." They met Richard at the door, and Sophie saw him take in the restaurant, the mismatched chairs, the chalkboard menus, the laughter of customers over simple food. His expression was unreadable. "Hello, Father." "Sophia." He looked older than she remembered, more tired. "I've come to see how you are." "I'm good, really good. Would you like to come in, have some coffee?" Richard followed them to a corner booth, moving stiffly, like he wasn't sure of the protocol. Ethan brought coffee and left them alone, understanding that some conversations needed space. "The business appears successful," Richard said after a long pause. "It is. We're making a living, supporting ourselves. It's not a corporate empire, but it's ours. I've been thinking about what you said, about control and cages and all of it." Richard wrapped his hands around the coffee cup like he needed something to hold on to. "Your mother used to say the same things before she got sick. She'd tell me I was too focused on building legacies and not enough on building a life. She was right. Yes, she was. Richard looked up, and Sophie saw something she'd never seen before: vulnerability. I've been alone in that penthouse for 3 years now, working 18-hour days, closing deals, expanding the empire. And for what? For who? I have everything I thought I wanted, and it turns out it's not worth much when there's no one to share it with. Dad, let me finish, please. Richard took a shaky breath. I was wrong. About you, about that man you love, about this life you've chosen. I was so convinced that my way was the only way that I couldn't see you were finding your own path. A better path, maybe. Sophie felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm 67 years old, and I'm tired, and I don't want to die alone having never known my daughter, having never met my... He paused. Your assistant, Caroline. She showed me the Christmas card you sent, the one with the 3 of you. You called the little girl your daughter. Lila. Her name is Lila, and she is my daughter in every way that matters. I'd like to meet her, if you'd allow it. I'd like to try to be something. Maybe not the father I should have been, but something better than the one I was. Sophie looked at this man who had controlled and manipulated and hurt her, and saw past the tyrant to the scared, lonely person underneath. He'd made terrible choices, but so had she before learning better. Maybe everyone deserved a chance at redemption. Okay, but understand, we do this on my terms now. You don't get to swoop in and take over. You don't get to criticize our choices or try to buy your way into our lives. You come as a guest, not a king. I understand. And if you ever try to control me or my family again, you're out. Permanently. No second chances. Agreed. Sophie called Lila over, watching her father's face as he met his granddaughter for the first time. Lila was cautious but curious. This 10-year-old who knew her, Sophie had come from somewhere complicated but didn't quite understand the details. Are you really Sophie's dad? The one who lives in the tall building? I am, Richard said, and Sophie heard his voice crack slightly. I'm sorry I haven't been around before. I've made some mistakes. It's okay. Grown-ups make mistakes sometimes. That's what Sophie always says. The important thing is you try to fix them. Richard looked at Sophie, and she saw him really seeing her, not as a corporate asset or a disappointment, but as a woman who'd built a good life and raised a wise, kind child. She's right, and I'm trying to fix them, if you'll let me. The reconciliation was slow and imperfect. Richard came to dinner once a month, stilted and uncomfortable at first in their small house, slowly learning how to be a grandfather and father instead of a CEO. He and Ethan developed a wary respect. 2 men from different worlds, united by love for the same woman. He never did release the full inheritance. The legal battle continued, though with less venom. But Sophie found she didn't care anymore. The trust fund had been enough to give them security, and the restaurant provided the rest. They weren't wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were happy. On Sophie's 27th birthday, Ethan proposed. Not with some elaborate production, but simply on their porch, where they'd first admitted they loved each other. The ring was modest, all he could afford, but Sophie treasured it more than any of the jewelry her father had ever bought her. I know I should have asked sooner, Ethan said, nervous despite the fact that they'd been building a life together for years. I know we're basically already married in every way that matters, but I wanted to make it official. Wanted you to have my name if you want it. Wanted Lila to know for certain that we're a family forever. Yes, Sophie said, laughing through happy tears. Yes, absolutely yes. I've been waiting for you to ask. They were married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the restaurant, surrounded by friends from Cedar Falls and Sophie's small nonprofit family. Richard walked her down the aisle, tears in his eyes, finally understanding what his daughter had been trying to tell him all along, that love wasn't a merger or a business deal, but something wild and messy and worth fighting for. Lila was the flower girl, taking her duties very seriously, making sure every petal was distributed with precision. She'd cried when Sophie and Ethan officially adopted her a month before the wedding, becoming Lila Walker Blake, a name that bridged 2 worlds. You're really my mom now, Lila had whispered when the adoption was finalized, like legally and everything. I've been your mom since the day I met you, Sophie had replied. The paperwork is just catching up. Standing at the altar, a simple arch they decorated with flowers from Mrs. Chen's garden. Sophie looked at Ethan in his thrift store suit and Lila in her carefully chosen dress, and the gathered crowd of people who'd supported them through everything, and felt a completeness she'd never known in her father's world. "I love you," she whispered to Ethan as they exchanged rings. "I love you too. Always have. From that first rainy night. The night I was lost and you found me." "No," Ethan corrected gently. "The night we found each other." They kissed as husband and wife, and the small gathering erupted in applause. It wasn't a fairy tale wedding. There were no ice sculptures or champagne fountains or designer gowns. It was better. It was real. The reception was held at Walker's Corner, naturally, with food they'd cooked themselves and music from a local band that played for tips. Richard Blake danced stiffly with his daughter, trying hard to be present, to be human, to make up for lost time. "You were right," he told her as they swayed to some country song Ethan had chosen. "About all of it. I'd built an empire and lost everything that mattered. I'm glad you had the courage I didn't." "It's not too late for you either, Dad. You could retire, find something that makes you happy, instead of just successful." "Maybe I will. I've been thinking about it. There's a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, teaching them how to build businesses ethically. Might be a way to use what I've learned for something good." "I think that sounds perfect." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Sophie found herself standing outside the restaurant, watching through the window as her family and friends laughed and danced and celebrated. Ethan appeared beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing a question he'd asked countless times over the years. Sophie leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the certainty of his love, the life they'd built together against all odds. She thought about the girl who'd run away in the rain, terrified and desperate. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong and capable and loved. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it more than ever. "This, all of this, is exactly where I'm supposed to be." From inside the restaurant, Lila's laughter rang out, clear and bright and full of joy. Sophie smiled, knowing that sound alone was worth more than all of her father's billions, worth more than any inheritance or trust fund, because she'd learned the truth that money could never teach, that the richest life isn't measured in dollars or status or power, but in moments like these, in burnt pancakes and blistered hands and love given freely, in family built not by blood, but by choice, in home found not in penthouses, but in small houses with sagging porches and warm lights. In the end, Sophie hadn't just escaped her cage. She'd learned to fly, and she'd found that the view from here, from this simple, imperfect, beautiful life, was better than anything she'd seen from her father's tower. "Come on," Ethan said, tugging her hand. "Our daughter wants to make a toast. Something about how princesses don't need rescuing, but it helps to have good people in your corner. She's wise beyond her years. Wonder where she gets that from." They went back inside, back to their family, back to the life they'd built one choice at a time. And as Sophie raised her glass to toast to love and family and second chances, she knew with absolute certainty that every sacrifice had been worth it. Because this, right here, right now, surrounded by these people in this place, this was everything. This was home. This was love. This was the life she'd always been meant to live. She'd just had to be brave enough to reach for it. And in reaching, she had found not just herself, but everything that truly mattered.